Our power is in our voice. Our power, it's in our thoughts. Our power is in our actions. Our power, it's already innate in who we are. We are the earth. We are the sky. We are the trees. We are our ancestors. We are the future generations. We are all that is.
To day 3 of the People's Reset 2026. We're here for Agorism and Parallel Networks. How's everybody feeling here in person? Make some noise for the people at home. Make some noise if you want more people to join us next year, more people from home. We've got people tuned in from the UK, from Australia, from New Zealand, from Germany. I went and checked the stats. Of course, the US, Canada, Mexico. Thank you all for joining us at home. We want you here in person next year. Big things coming. All right, we're going to keep rolling on. We got 3 more presentations for the day. We've got more workshops this evening. There's also going to be a conscious speed dating this evening. Who's going to be showing up for that? Okay, a few of you are here. Well, look, I want to tell you, this is interesting. Miriam and I have never been requested for more than anything to bring the speed dating back. We did it a couple years ago, and it was a fun experiment, and we said, okay, we'll do other things. Then the last 2 years, all kinds of people, and I will tell you this, mainly women, have asked, are you going to do the speed dating again? Are you guys bringing back the speed dating? So gentlemen, I hope you show up tonight if you're single and looking for friendship or something more. Come here tonight, 6 to 8 p.m. We're going to have a fun time. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's bring up my brother, John Bush. He's gonna share some of his story of what he went through last year, and more importantly, the solutions of how you can build the parallel world for yourself. Give a round of applause to John Bush, everyone.
Give it up for Derek Bros at DBrosLiveFree on Twitter. All right. How is everybody? Good. Wow, it's so great to be here. I want to thank Derek and Miriam and the team and the crew. They messed up my slides over there, though, so I gave them to you earlier, though, right? No, just kidding. Because I produce events too, and every year Derek's like, you got to have your slides in by this date. I don't have slides. I'm just going to ramble. I'm just going to have an outline, and not to give the speakers a hard time that broke the rules, but every year people have them the last minute. It creates a little turmoil over there. So just literally right when we were about to start, I was like, did you get my slides? And threw them off. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for being here. It's always really special to be gathered with a community of like-minded freedom lovers. And I got to say, last night was really special and meaningful. Who was here for the Natalie Rise concert and all the awesome conscious hip-hop artists? Oh, man. Been going through a lot lately, and it's events like this and moments like that last night that really recharge my batteries. And when we were all dancing to Bob Marley, I was like, had a little emotional moment, shed a tear. It's just really special. That's really what it's all about. I mean, we're always seeking something and trying to build this, and I can't wait till it's all created. But in all reality, what we're all seeking is already here. We just have to sink into it and be present in the moment. And that's one of the many lessons that I'm going to share that I learned last year and ongoing, and I'm still learning. It was actually a struggle for me to get here. I'm sure you folks are aware there's a giant winter storm. It was man-made. It's all man-made. Natural weather disasters don't happen anymore. It's all man-made. I don't know where I stand on all that, but I have a feeling they're not all man-made, but who knows? Anyway, I had 3 flights canceled, like 2 days of flights canceled. Then 1 flight, then the next day, 2 flights canceled. And I was like, what am I going to do? They're going to rebook it tomorrow morning. And then that was going to be yesterday. I would have got in late yesterday if I got in at all. So I had my Uber driver turn around, picked up my truck, and I drove from Austin to Dallas-Fort Worth because I thought that would be more reliable than the Austin to Dallas connection. It was a nice 3.5-hour drive, but I didn't want to miss this event. I know Derek and Miriam and the crew put so much into it. And like I said, it's just so meaningful for me to be here and to see how this effort that started as an idea in 2020 has grown into a global movement. And perhaps the most meaningful part is to see how it's impacted so many of your lives and impacted my life. And I know Derek's cup is full and Miriam's. And so just thank you so much for being here. As I was driving up on the highway, I was listening to Jocko Willink. You guys know he wrote Extreme Ownership. He has a follow-up book called The Dichotomy of Leadership, where he talks about the nuance between too much leadership and too much laissez-faire. And it's really a mature way to look at things, the nuance of everything. People get caught so much in us versus them, black and white, but there's a lot of gray, and the gray is where we ought to live. But he starts the book by sharing a story of a soldier that got his leg blown off in Iraq. And the soldier wasn't worried at all about his injury. He was just really upset that he may have to go home and not support the mission and the cause. Now, being here, of course, pales in comparison to that type of struggle, but that kind of reinforced, like, you're going to get down there, you're going to show up. This is a really valuable mission, and it's a really important thing we're all doing here, building the world we all desire. So thank you so much for being here, and thanks for giving me your attention for my talk. So I'm going to share a bit about last year, which, as I was sharing with old Zach, I was like, man, it was a really shitty year. He's like, no, dude, don't look at it that way. You got to reframe it. And I was like, no, man, it was total shit. But as Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, it's the lotus flower that can bloom out of the manure. And so here I stand before you, a lotus flower absolutely covered in shit from last year. And the shit don't smell good, but boy, there's a lot of lessons. So as I shared, last year was a big struggle, and I'm going to try to get through this as fast as possible without rambling. Can you tell me when I started? 2:45. Okay. Whew. Well, we started 10 minutes late. All right, there we go. Negotiated a little bit extra time there. You see how that works out? Never take no for an answer. So I want to tie this into some parallel structures and not just give you a sob story about my struggles. I promise I'm going to share a bunch of lessons that I hope all of you take seriously, because I learned a lot of those lessons the hard way, and I'm still embodying them. As I've come to find out, because I'm an intellectual, I think a lot. It's easy. The lessons come very easily. It's living those lessons, embodying them, that's a lifelong struggle. And I'm here for the struggle, and I'm sure you guys are as well. Alex, like, it doesn't have to be a struggle, bro. He's in the front row there. Got to get on. But I'm going to tie this in. I'm going to tie this in to sharing a little bit about my work in the private realm with the Trifecta framework, which I'm collaborating with Sacred Honor Educational Fellowship to get out to the world. It's a non-statutory common law trust, private membership association, and a ministry. And it's how we can pursue our purpose through that structure. And so the overall lesson to tie in my personal struggles last year with how I'm leveraging adversity and leveraging these structures to pursue my purpose further is that when we operate out of alignment, there tends to be friction, struggle, hardship, pain. That's both in relationships and when pursuing our purpose, our projects, our work. And the more that we can align with the divine, the greater ease and grace we'll have in pursuing relationships and our purpose. So I'm going to tie that all. That's the big idea that I want to convey today. And so, like I said, I'm going to share a lot of lessons, but understand God is still refining me, and there's still a whole lot of work to do. And I'm sure I'll learn these lessons many more times. There's an expression, I think it was Thomas Jefferson, that said it: the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. Well, so too is the price of living a good, holy life, trying to be the best version of yourself. It's just learning the lesson over and over and over and over. And one thing that I've learned is that we all need to be easy on ourselves and be forgiving of ourselves and each other. And in the past year, I've really deepened my relationship with Jesus Christ, and the message of forgiveness has been extremely powerful as part of that. So yeah, all right. So 2025 went into the year with a lot on my plate, and my partner's plate, and my team, and also went into it already with a mindset, having taught folks at Live Free Academy. We got some Live Free Academy community members and accelerator members in the audience. Yeah. I always teach folks what Napoleon Hill teaches, within every adversity lies the seed of an equal or greater benefit. And so I went into the year already with that mindset. Whenever adversity comes, what lessons can I learn from it? And that was a major blessing, without a doubt. So went into the year basically pre-programmed with that understanding. And throughout 2024, 2023, I'd been dabbling and thinking more about Christ and Christianity and reading scripture. But most of the time I was stuck in my head. And for folks that are looking to deepen their connection with God, whatever that means to you, I just really want to encourage you to take that journey from your head to your heart. All the overthinking is just getting in our way. Whenever you open your heart to God, to Christ, to whatever, I swear it'll really accelerate that relationship that you have, which is really what it's all about, if you ask me. All right, so the year kicked off. I haven't shared this publicly because there's still a lawsuit pending. It's not funny. I mean, as I said that, I was like, this is going to come off kind of comical, but it's actually not very funny, but that's life. So I had a company called Brave Botanicals, and we sold kratom and cannabis products. And at the beginning of the year, I learned that I was getting served because allegedly somebody died from consuming my product. Now, I don't know if anybody's taken kratom or not. And I've done massive research because many years ago, the FDA came out and they're like, there's been 47 kratom-related deaths, and the CDC's like, there's 91 kratom-related deaths. And it turns out it's an awful lot like a COVID death. You go look into it, and a lot of those folks had heroin in their system or fentanyl, or one guy like literally crashed off a bridge in his motorcycle, but he had kratom in his system, and it was marked as a kratom-related death. So I never chose to sell the concentrated kratom because it has a higher abuse potential. I've always just sold the raw plant powder. And as someone who's used kratom in my life, I know that I really find it hard to believe that someone could die from consuming kratom alone. But nonetheless, somebody died, and apparently, I know for sure they were one of my customers, and they sued me. Not only did they sue me, but they sued my other company, and they sued me in my personal capacity. The company lawsuit for the kratom company, which really should have been the only nobody should have been sued in the first place, in all honesty, but that got settled with a big giant lawsuit, and the other two are still pending. Come to find out, there was actually like police reports that were filed about this person, and there was a skirmish with his family, and there was some alcohol involved, and he like abandoned his car one night after being at a bar, and there's a lot of a mess there, but it was the start to my year, and it's still going on. And so that was a challenge and just kind of something lingering there. I learned a lot of lessons from it. In life and entrepreneurship, there's always risk. And I think it's important that we budget and expect there to be hardship, expect there to be risks that take place. But I shouldn't feel the need to defend myself, but all of our kratom's tested for heavy metals and impurities and all sorts of stuff. And I've had that business since 2017 and never had an issue with anyone else in the entire history. That's 2017 is a long time to have a company. And so I think there's a little bit something else at foot, which also brings me to another lesson. There's always more to the story than meets the eye. Also, be wary of professionals. I hope my attorney's not watching, but there were some decisions that were made without my consent, which is not a cool attorney-client thing, that I wouldn't like. If there was going to be a settlement, part of that settlement agreement would have been to dismiss the other two lawsuits as well, and then we'll settle. That didn't happen. That's unfortunate. So part of the lesson there is like, be wary of when you're working with professionals. Oftentimes our own intuition is better than a high-paid attorney. Also, success in life has more to do with cutting and eliminating things than adding things. That company was not getting my attention for the longest time, especially since I started Live Free Academy in April of 2021, and I had intended to close it. I stopped taking kratom myself. I'm still a fan and an advocate, especially if folks are struggling with addiction or struggling with depression. It's far superior to taking pharmaceuticals or taking pain medicine if you have some ailments in that regard. But I found that it kind of numbed my emotions a little bit, which can be helpful, but it also is not useful when you're trying to be the best version of yourself, because our emotions are powerful signals. So had I cut that business probably shorter, sooner, maybe that would have been avoided in the first place. Anyway, that's part of the struggle of John's 2025, a year of total shit. I'm not going to share much about this story because it has to do with my son, but my son had a spat of depression related to his education in school and some differences that I had with his mom. And this was a big struggle, and it led to a lot of friction in my relationship. And I'm really proud of the way that I showed up. And the lesson that I want to share there is oftentimes, especially for men, there's a tendency for us to try to provide solutions and to solve and fix, when in all reality, the best thing we could do for our loved ones is just to hold space, just to be there for someone, because oftentimes that's all they're really seeking. That all cleared up, and through that holding of space, it deepened my relationship with my son, which is really important to me. Now, here's another piece as the year went on. Of course, I'm John Bush, the exit and build guy. Exit the cities, buy land, and build community. Let's host entire events all about intentional communities. Hey, Instagram, check out the intentional community we created. Everything's so great, and we just had a potluck, and here's the community garden we're working on, and let me introduce you to our incredible cast of community members. Well, the community completely fell apart in a giant blaze of glory. Why is that funny? It's okay. It's okay. We're having fun here. We had an intentional community on our 10-acre homestead called Radical Roots Ranch. At one point, there was 12 humans living on the property. My family of 4, which is now a family of 3. I'll get to that shortly. Another family of 4, but they had a 5th child in our guest house, which happened to be a birthing center. There's another amenity for living on the community, is a makeshift birthing center. And then there was a couple that lived there, and another individual lived there later. So it was 12 folks. Does that add up? I don't know. 12 people at the peak, and things were going well until they weren't. It didn't just like end or people drifted apart. It ended with like a high drama, intense scenario. And unfortunately, a lot of that energy was directed at me. So it wasn't actually that big of a challenge, because I've done a lot of work with my ego. And I tell you what, if above all else, this last year has been extremely humbling, and it's actually created the opportunity for me to submit to a higher power, because before I thought I had it all figured out. But as one thing happened after another, I realized that just as it was a shitty year, so too, I don't know shit. Just figuring it out as I go. And that's A-okay. And I'm finally given into that. It's not my plan. It's not happening on my timing. It's happening on God's timing. And I'm comfortable with that for the most part. So I just want to share some lessons that I learned from that experience. Oh, I was going to say, because I've done that ego work, I didn't really have the experience of like, boy, John, you're such a phony. You're trying to teach people about how to create intentional communities. You're even selling courses, buy land, build community, how to create a successful intentional community. And then yours failed. I never really had that imposter thing where it's like, you suck now and everybody's going to think you're a fool, because part of my shtick is to share with authenticity and vulnerability about how hard this struggle really is. So shout out to Yoshi, who was sharing from the stage about this glorious community. There he is. This great community. And then he's like, but there's a lot of problems, right? And so we need to be real, because I know all of us have these passions and these dreams, and some of us have tried. And that's the most important part, trying, because oftentimes people live in fear. What if it falls apart in a blaze of glory? What will people think of me, or whatever fear we may have? The most important thing is to try. To get to it, to work things out. And the folks that have come before you, it's important and contingent upon us to share with folks authentically and honestly, and not try to put on some false Instagram front and be fake and phony, because that doesn't serve anybody in the least bit. So it is hard. It's why so few people are able to do it successfully. Success does leave clues. So I want to encourage you to visit and immerse yourself in successful communities. But some of the struggles that we had that I'd like to share, one of which was there's a power dynamic when there's a landowner and then people are renting. It kind of throws off the energetics. It can work, but it's challenging. I think the best model is one where people have ownership or stewardship in their lot, in their space, so they feel vested in it, not just renting on someone else's property. That also created all sorts of challenges because there were expectations of me personally. So I felt good every time I put in a solid work day and when I contributed to the farm chores and stuff, but other folks thought it wasn't enough. Little did they realize I'm the sole party, well, for the most part, that's paying the mortgage. And without the mortgage getting paid on the land, there is no intentional community. So that's why I got to go off to the office. But on the same token, I most definitely could have been a lot more present with the community and with that mission, which brings me to a key lesson that is kind of one of the grand lessons of all these experiences, is that we shouldn't take on more than we can fully give our presence to, because it leads to a lot of struggle and strife, especially if you're one of the leaders or one of the creators of that project. Presence with the human relationship is a fundamental piece of success in everything. And I've learned that, again, the hard way, but here I am trying to be present, trying to keep my phone off. So another lesson is like, don't marry somebody before dating them when it comes to community members. So that's not the lesson from my marriage, by the way. We dated for like 4 years, but there's lessons coming from that. There was like this need or this unhealthy desire for help because we had such high ambitions, and what check. Give it up for the production team. These guys work hard, and it's like all mission driven. So blessings to them. Okay, so there was this expectation, like this over expectation of what we ought to be doing because we had all these grand ambitions in our head. And when we would come up short, that would create feelings of friction and like we're not doing enough. So as a result of that unhealthy desire, there was a rush to bring on more community members to help and contribute. And we ended up inviting a family to stay on the property after just meeting with them twice. And those meetings were great. And they were like, wow, the Freedom Cell Network. I heard about the Freedom Cell Network. I didn't know that you co-founded it. This is so cool. And natural law and private realm stuff. And we were just like totally jiving while we were having lunch together. That's the easy part, right? And then we met another time, and then it was like, you should come live on the RV pad that's directly outside of our bedroom window. And we're going to interact all the time for the next like 6 months. These sure were 2 great lunches we had. So I just really want to encourage you guys. Like Derek Bros, I think, is setting a great tone when it comes to like really taking your time. Because just because we have the same ideas doesn't mean that we've all done the work or we're ready to live in community. It's not easy at all. So I would encourage you to do stress tests with folks. So like if you put on events or you host workshops or you have like grueling work days or you're building, you know, a hemp home or whatever, invite people to come work with you and stress test them. Maybe even manufacture a crisis to see how they respond. This is what we've thought of. Because sitting down in an arena, in a space where your nervous system is all relaxed, of course we're going to get along. Of course we're going to get along at this event, right? And you're like, we should move in together. We should work together. We should be business partners. We should do a community together. And then when reality sets in and the honeymoon phase is over, you really get to see who people are. So take your time, go slow. And again, the final lesson I want to impart is be present. Be present, have regular meetings, have potlucks, just be there and encourage open communication. And I would also encourage you to like really do what you can to suss out if people are willing to do the work. I'm going to share later about a project I'm involved with called Haven Village. It's a 216-acre private realm community development in Tennessee. They've had hardship. I've had hardship. We're collaborating on the project, and I think we're doing it the right way. And there's a very intense vetting process. with some questions and some awareness. And it's a longer process before somebody gets invited to be part of the community. So take your time with that stuff. One of the folks that was living on the property also happened to be my best friend and business partner. And I don't have a lot of friends, to be honest. I mean, you guys are my friends, right? But like folks that I hang out with and go have dinner regularly, they're few and far between because I've made the foolish mistake of spending all my time immersed in my work. And sure, that gets accolades and pats on the back, which is meaningful and such, but don't have a lot of friends. But this guy was my best friend, really great friend of mine. You know, in fact, my son burned me up and he was like, oh, my son, he said, yeah, Dad, it's like the only people that are your friends are people that you pay. They work for you. Ooh, the burn, son. Oh, those kids these days. What are you going to do with them? He's a good mirror, that kid. My daughter is even more of a mirror. She's 14. Okay, so my good friend Ryan also left at that time. He was part of the community, and he was my vice president of sales, and he was a partner in my business. And we really bonded a lot. We especially bonded over whiskey. So he got me in a lot of trouble drinking whiskey because I never really drank. And I was like, oh, I got a friend just like in high school and college I could drink with. But he also left because, come to find out, like many people are probably guilty of, and I hope that you're capable of admitting it, oftentimes we treat the people closest to us the worst. And that is something that I did with my best friend Ryan and my ex-wife. And reflecting back on it, I realized that I had some major control issues. And there happened to be a correlation between when my business was the most successful. We did over $1.2 million in sales a couple years ago, which was pretty cool. A few years ago, it was pretty cool, but it came at a big cost because the more stress and 25 employees and event after event and webinar and workshop and all sorts of stuff, the less control I felt in my life, the more tendency I had to control other people. And the two people closest to me bore the brunt of it. And that wasn't cool. And it finally came to a head. There were some communication issues. Now, mind you, he bears some of the responsibility as well, but I have no problem taking responsibility for the role that I played in the destruction of that relationship. I am happy to report, though, several months later, after me coming to God and humbling myself and him doing all sorts of growth and us meeting up at a friend's men's retreat over whiskey, we kind of reconnected and rekindled and started a series of meetings and going to dinner together. And now he's back with the company and he's back to being my best friend. All right. So my friend count went from 0 to 1. I'm just kidding. I got friends in this audience. You guys are my friends. So that was really hard, though, because at that point, before actually Ryan left, I honestly told myself, like, well, you know, if this is what rock bottom looks like, everything falling apart and all this drama and adversity, I think I'm going to be okay. You know, because again, the whole while I was deepening my relationship with God, I was already programmed to recognize that adversity is inevitable, especially the more ambitious and the more big things we're doing and putting myself out there. It's inevitable. So when it comes, it's just an opportunity to readjust. It's God telling me something like, hey, man, you're not living in alignment with this or that. So you got to fix it, figure it out. And that consciousness and awareness, it really makes it a lot easier to roll with the punches. Not that it's not hard or there's not strong emotions involved, but I really was like, okay, I got this. And then my wife left me, and that was one of the hardest things that I've ever been through. Still hard. You guys know her if you've been coming to these events. It's a challenge to share this because I don't want to overshare, but I also just want to impart these lessons. So I'm going to speak in some vagaries, but we had a beautiful, amazing relationship for the longest time. And then we got married. And there was kind of a shift. It wasn't like a conscious thing, but I don't know if people get complacent or whatnot. And again, I'm not one of those guys, you got to caution yourself if you're a guy and you struggle with relationships, because a lot of guys, especially if you're on Twitter and X or whatever, there's this tendency to be in this woman hate thing. And with my first divorce, yes, 2 divorces. I looked it up. I looked it up and I was like, oh no, how many people actually have 2 divorces? It's about 9%. So special group. I've known people that have had 3 divorces, and it's like more power to them. But it definitely raised questions like, what's wrong with me? And thankfully, God was there to say, there's a whole lot wrong with you, son, but I still love you. For real. Thought we were going to be talking about cryptocurrency or something. We had an amazing relationship for the most part, tons of love. Tons of affection, but there was a lot of unhealthy habits that we utilized in order to deal with stress. There was a lot of distraction, a lot of escaping, and as I said, I was controlling for a while and kind of diminished her sparkle in some ways. And I feel bad about that. And a lot of it, because she worked with me, a lot of it was like we had all these ambitions, but when you have these ambitions and your subconscious knows that you're already totally overwhelmed and stressed out, bro, you self-sabotage things. And one of those ways that I self-sabotage was just to go shit on everybody's projects. And the controlling thing was like, I'm 40 years old and I've been doing activism and entrepreneurship for 20 years now. And these younger folks, they don't have it figured out. And I know that's going to be a mistake. So I'm just going to insert myself and assert my authority as the leader of the company and blah, 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 blah. But that's terrible leadership in a household and in a business or an activist organization. And as I said, this year really taught me, like, I don't have it all figured out in the least bit. And I'm okay with that. I'm still figuring it out as we go. And we don't have to have it all figured out by any means. None of us do. We're fooling ourselves if we do. So there was a period of control. There was unhealthy habits. And ultimately I came to realize, like, there was a lot of selfishness on my part. So some lessons that I learned from that whole experience, and I'm still learning. Just want to caution you, like, if you work with your spouse, you both really, really, really need to be doing the work, because you're putting yourself in a lot of high pressure situations constantly and consistently. And there's actually something to, honey, I'm home and let's spend time together and not talk about our work and our mission. Now, at the same hand, there's beautiful couples that are able to pull it off. And part of their relationship is that mission. And that's a very beautiful thing too. So it's not one or the other is right or wrong. It's just either way, no matter what you're doing, you need to be doing the work constantly. In fact, my good friends Danny and Vanessa, who have graced this stage before, they're like all into the work. They're all wooed out and like psychedelic plant medicine. Now they're into like all this like kink therapy stuff too, which is like, okay, sounds like a party. They have like these temple nights, pagan parties and stuff, which as a Christian, I'm like, literally the Bible says not to have pagan orgies. Wait a second. And they're like blasting pagan orgies. It's for real. So it's hard being a Christian because I would like to go to those pagan orgies sometime. Told you I was going to be vulnerable with you. Not going to the pagan orgies. I don't think Christian orgies are a thing. That would be not cool, be sacrilegious. Anyway, for a while, I was like triggered by Danny and Vanessa because both of them worked with me at one point. Vanessa still does. She does all our social media stuff. And they're like, it's always going back to like, oh, the work and my shadow in the mirror. And I was like, bro, we're trying to freaking have a business meeting here. And we're talking about shadow work again. Are you guys just always doing the work? And they're like, yeah, dude. And then after this year, I was like, oh, I get it. We should just always be doing the work all the time. That's a good thing. And I probably resisted it because I need to do the work, right? Which is what I'm doing right now with this free therapy session, just venting to you guys all my woes. Well, thank you. So just be cautious if you're going to be working together. There's a beauty to it, but it also could lead to some struggles. And it comes back to the presence again. So one of the things I recognized was that I was so obsessed with my work that I wasn't present for the needs of my loved ones. And nothing's more important than your relationships with your loved ones and being in tune with their feelings and their needs and not always being focused on what you want out of life. So that presence is absolutely critical. And if you're struggling in a relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, marriage, whatever it may be, seek help from a friend, ideally a friend that has a great relationship that you look up to, but also a therapist. And we had a therapist, but the therapist was terrible. We would just pay her to listen. And me being like a solutions guy, I'm like, so you're going to give us some concrete tactics and strategies we can employ back at the house or what? Some of the therapy sessions, we ended up having a deeper rift after the therapy. And then when we were separated, I found a therapist that was like all rooted in mindfulness and all this stuff. And we saw her a couple times and we're like, we should have been seeing her the whole time. Maybe things would have been different. Everything happened exactly as it should. And that's another lesson to share. So don't forget to seek help, but above all else, just be present with your loved ones. It seems pretty elementary, but oftentimes it's a challenge. So, man, it was a really tough year. I did a lot of reflection. I've been doing the work. One of those things is like, why weren't you present with everyone's needs? Why do you feel so ambitious and driven? And that's something that my therapist asked me, like, so why are you doing all this stuff all the time? All these businesses and all these events and mission stuff. And I was like, well, I woke up to the New World Order in 2002. And when you understand there's a predator class hell-bent on creating a totalitarian technocratic dictatorship and eliminating a large portion of the population, you got to be committed and do the work. Yeah. That's why I thought I was so ambitious, or at least that's what I told myself. And then she said, yeah, but besides that. And I was like, huh. And this was a great realization for me that she helped lead me to. I already had inklings of it. I was drunk with my family one night at a family night, and we were all sitting in the living room, and it was like after a birthday celebration or whatever, and we were all just sitting around. We drink a little bit, nothing crazy or unhealthy, but the barrier to just sharing was a little bit lowered, which is a positive thing about alcohol. And my brother said something that was like triggering, and I kind of just called him in a grounded way, like, why is it that you always bring that kind of thing up? Like, what's that all about? And it spurred this really healthy discussion amongst my whole family. And I shared with my dad that, you know, for the longest time, I felt like you were never proud of me, Dad. And I always felt like I had to show you guys that I was successful because I was such a screw up in school. I got in trouble all the time. And then when I became a Ron Paul activist in 2007, the Ron Paul revolution, and before that, doing 9/11 truth activism, I became a leader. And all of a sudden, all these folks were like following, and we were part of this movement. And my parents would have these older people that were their age walk up to him and be like, wow, you guys really did a good job with John. We're so blessed to have him in our community, all this stuff. And so I found myself every family meal, I would always have a story to tell. So my parents and my dad especially would feel proud of me. And in that evening with my dad, he said, well, you know, my dad never told me he was proud of me either. In fact, just the opposite. He always was disappointed that I didn't want to take over the family farm and be involved. I wanted to go to college and be an engineer. And so I saw that, okay, well, that's why my father passed that on to me. And now that I'm aware of it, I need to do what I can not to pass that on to my child. But it gave me the awareness that maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm so ambitious and driven, because I'm seeking that self-worth from you guys and from the freedom movement and from all of this work. And so again, that's some struggle that I've had that impacted me in a negative way. But on the same token, it's given me the drive to become the person that I am today and to have these ambitions and to be a leader and to put these projects together. But again, it's not black or white. It's about balance. And one thing that I've come to find is the most important mission, more so than exit and build, upset the New World Order, build the community, whatever it may be, build the new earth, is build lasting, loving, meaningful relationships with those around you. Yeah. I was hoping to have more time to talk about the private realm stuff, but I'm doing a workshop tomorrow at 12:45 in the activation room, so I can share more about that there. So My wife left me and we were separated for a while, and I found myself all alone. Now I had my kids half the time, but the times that I was alone were very, very hard. And I hadn't been alone for 16 years. My first marriage was 9 years, and then I was single for like 4 or 5 months. Wasn't a Christian then, so I was single and ready to mingle. So I was filling a cup in unhealthy ways in that regard. No pagan orgies. No pagan orgies in New York City. No, I didn't go to an orgy. Anyway, I was involved in this polyamory like Facebook group for a while, and they would have parties and events, and there was a room over there. I didn't go in it. Thought about going in it. Anyway, that was old John. I'm gonna have to pray after this. Woo! Alone. I hadn't been alone for 16 years. And I tell you what, I mean, I wasn't used to it. I'm still not used to it. And one of the most unhealthy coping habits that doesn't seem unhealthy, we all know it's unhealthy, is this damn thing. And I found myself turning to this big time during the separation period, and just and I would tell myself, oh, yeah, I know the reels, it's like an attention span and dopamine, but my stuff's like Christian stuff now, and like Alex Hormozy and Tony Robbins, so it's healthy for me. No, it's just a distraction because you're afraid to sit and be with yourself and reflect on who you really are and why you show up in these ways, and that's what you need to do. So I was drinking a little bit for some time to kind of not crazy. I had a relationship with White Claws for a while. It's a great drink. You don't feel hungover, no sugar. Anyway, maybe 2 grams of sugar. I said, I need to do something. So I started this 75 hard and holy challenge. There's a 75 hard challenge, 2 45-minute workouts. You read 10 minutes a day. You strictly adhere to a diet. You post in a group your progress. And I was like, 2 45-minute workouts. I don't know if I could pull that off. But what about 1 45-minute workout of the body and 1 45-minute workout of the spirit? Prayer, meditation, breath work, whatever it may be. So I began a 75-day reset, totally sober. It was the first time in my adult life I had not had kratom, CBD, alcohol, or cannabis gummies. And I would always just have a little nibble of cannabis gummies, so I thought it wasn't a big deal. But turned out when I quit that, I'd learned that cannabis had me by the balls. And I was using it as a crutch. Part of my expression, the balls. But that's the best way to describe it. And I was sober and doing 45 minutes of work on the ranch, and reading scripture and praying and watching mindfulness videos and stuff for 75 days straight. And I tell you, it was extremely transformational for me. And during that time, I dramatically deepened my relationship with Christ. And that was extremely powerful for me. So Jesus Christ, whatever you think about him, if you don't think he was the Son of God and resurrected on the 3rd day, there's still so much value that you can gain from his teachings. I happen to believe, I call him my God. And for a while, I was into this new age Christ consciousness thing, which seems to permeate in our communities. But to tell you the truth, it wasn't until I humbled myself and put God above me that I really began to experience immense benefits from a relationship with God. And one of the most profound impacts that had on me was during the separation. My sister and my family showed up so strong for me. And my sister called me, and one day she was sharing, your wife sent me a text kind of explaining why she left, and I'd like to read it to you. And she read me the text that listed some of the transgressions and how I was hurtful and how I showed up in not the best way. And I immediately broke down crying. And for the first time, I realized what it meant to be a sinner. And my relationship with Christianity was always like, I'm a great guy. I don't sin. That's like some control mechanism or something. But in that moment, I realized the meaning of sin, which is a separation from the divine. The word itself means missing the mark. And perhaps the most profound teachings of Christ is when he was asked by the Pharisees, when they tried to trick him, "Teacher, what are the most important commandments?" And he said, "There's two. The first one is to love God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul. And the second one is to love your neighbor like you love yourself." And the way that I had been showing up for people, I wasn't loving my neighbor like I love myself. And one day I was kind of coaching somebody that's close to me that's also a Christian, so we can use scripture to be like, are we living in alignment with who we want to be? Because they were being mean to someone else, and I shared that piece, love your neighbor like you love yourself. And they said, well, what if you don't love yourself? And I realized that the root of most of our struggles, insecurities, and when we project onto other people is a lack of love, and it's a lack of self-worth. And we have a tendency to find that love or to try to fill that void through unhealthy habits, whether it's scrolling, whether it's drinking, whether it's doing toxic type things. And I just want to share with you guys that if you're looking for that love, there's all sorts of different modalities that could help you to find it. But I found it through God and a relationship with Christ. And there's something really meaningful when the creator of the universe cares so deeply about you that they're willing to sacrifice themselves for your benefit, even thousands and thousands of years later. No matter what you believe about the veracity of that story, just that alone, that the perfect human being that never harmed another soul was willing to give himself up in the most painful of ways so that we could be liberated from that separation and we can reconnect with the divine. And so I had more to share, but I just want to share with you guys that this past year, 2025, was extremely challenging for me. But through it all, because I not only had that mindset and an intellectual capacity that within every adversity lies the seed of an equal or greater benefit, but more importantly, because I was finally willing and able to humble myself and put myself before God and ask for forgiveness, that I feel like I'm finally in a place where I can become the person that God needs me to be for the benefit of myself, my family, and this community. And I just want to share with you guys, appreciate y'all for being a part of all this work. And thank you so much for being here for my therapy session.
Keep it going for John Bush. Have you enjoyed that talk? Yeah. All right. We're going to keep moving. We got 2 more presentations. I will be the closing presentation today. So if you want to hear what I have to say, stay tuned. But our next speaker, unfortunately, could not be here in person. He had, like many people, weather issues getting down here from Texas, North Texas. So he's not going to be joining us in person, unfortunately. But he is going to be giving you an awesome presentation about building the parallel world that we're trying to all create here. But first, we want to talk about one of our sponsors, which is the company he actually works for. They're called Logos. Who here has heard of Logos? They've been our sponsor for the last 3 years. Their website is logos.co. You can see that. Who went to the meetup last night, or the networking session of the bar? Awesome. So they are focused on the tech side of things. Well, really not just the tech side, but also physical circles like we do with Freedom Cells. You can find more at logos.co. They wanted us to let you know that there is a book available for free, which I highly recommend. Sterling can tell you more about this. It's called Farewell to Westphalia, and it's by the founder of Logos. He's the founder of a couple different companies. Can we get that second website up there? And the website for people at home, we'll drop it in the stream, but it's logos.co/farewell to Westphalia. There you can see that. You can download that one for free. And I think that'll give you more of an understanding of sort of what their, not only what their message is as a company, but what they're trying to build, the world they're trying to create. And then also for those, our friends in Europe who want to go learn more about Logos, they have an upcoming, what they call an unconference in Lisbon, Portugal, March 6th to 8th. And so you can find all that information on the website. If you go to our website at thepeoplesreset.org, you'll see a link to their main website, and it'll take you to all these awesome things. So please give a big round of applause to Logos for helping make this happen. And I think we're ready to go to Sterling, right? We got Sterling standing by. All right, well, please give a warm welcome, and everybody at home, give a warm welcome in your living rooms to Sterling Lujan of Logos.
How are you doing, my friends? I just want to make sure, first of all, that I'm coming through okay. I don't know if it says, okay, so maybe it's unmuted now. I want to make sure you guys can hear me okay. I'm so happy to be here. I want to thank Derek and Miriam for offering me the chance to still do my presentation, although I am beaming in from home. Like Derek said, the ice storm unfortunately impacted my travels. I know there's a lot of you guys there who I wanted to reconnect with, but don't worry. We are 100% going to have that opportunity. Cool. So before I get into the actual presentation, I want to give you guys some context to help couch this, and hopefully you, even though I'm on screen here and giving it from a distance, there's going to be a lot of valuable material that you're going to be able to take from this presentation. And I also hope that the contents resonate with you. And I think from what I've seen, I've been watching the speeches behind the scenes. There's a lot of material that I'm going to share that people have been getting at. But I do think that what I'm about to tell you guys and what we're going to talk about today is going to get a bit more broad. We're going to touch on a lot of different subjects. I'm also going to offer myself a self-critique and then a critique on our movement as we go through this. So that's not to be taken personally. It's just where I'm at right now in life. And I think you guys are going to find the perspective fresh. So this is going to be more broad. Like I said, it's going to be heady. I'm going to have a lot of resources and information for you guys. And I do recommend that you have a pen and paper ready. You can write stuff down. Also, it will be still solutions focused, but this is going to be more like a bird's eye view solution focused, more like a holistic overarching view of what we're all working toward, right? So you guys know that I work with Logos. Thanks, Derek, again for mentioning them. And I work in the parallel institution, specifically the parallel institution and parallel society space. And I've had a lot of novel insights since I've been working there. Cool. So the title of this, let's go ahead and jump right into it. The title of this presentation is Building an Earth Mind to End Authority and to Achieve Collective Betterment. So the whole point of this discussion, guys, and this is the insights that I've had recently, and I'm not the only person who have had these insights, is that what we're working toward, not only technologically, but socially and culturally, is that we're developing a planetary Earth mind. And I mean that in a very literal sense. We're creating the necessary and the sufficient conditions to actually awaken the Earth. And this is, I'm going to get more into this throughout the process of this discussion, but this is a result not only of technology, like I said, but also social changes, cultural changes, specifically in these parallel institutions that we're developing. And you can take this either literally or you can take it more technologically and rationally, right? So what I mean by literally is that the Earth is literally going to form some type of consciousness. This is more of a spiritual approach. We're going to get into a few different thinkers. One of my favorite, who is really the best person that you can read about on this topic, one of the first people to articulate it. I think I mentioned him before in my talk from last year. His name's Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He wrote a book called The Phenomenon of Man, or The Human Phenomenon. Highly recommend reading that book. Please write it down. So he was one of the first people to not only intuit and predict the coming of the internet, and bear in mind, he was writing at the very beginning of the 20th century. His concept for this, and he took it even a step further, is this concept of the noosphere, right? This idea that the Earth is coming alive, and it was going to process some kind of volitional consciousness. And this is a culmination point that he called the omega point. Cool. So again, I wanted to provide that context. We're going to get more into that. First, I want to talk about the very real reasons, aside from any kind of spiritual speculations, of why we not only have to move this way, but we don't have a choice. We must at all costs move in this direction of awakening the planet, whether that's taken spiritually or it's taken more technologically in the form of planetary computation. Let me see if I can change this. Okay. So Terence McKenna, you guys know, he's one of my favorite thinkers. I think I've pretty much referenced him in some form or fashion in my past presentations. He said the world is in crisis because of an absence of consciousness. But of course, he would go on to say that we are trying to envelop the world in more spirit. We're in the process of a planetary awakening. We're trying to ultimately figure out how we can all come to our senses. This is why Derek has the People's Reset event. This is why we understand that everything around us, as McKenna said, is getting weirder and weirder, and things seem to be spiraling completely and irrevocably out of control. But we're here to try to course correct and to understand where we're headed. So let's talk about the problem. We don't want to just awaken the planet. We're not trying to move this direction just because it's an inevitability. I do think that there is a bit of a paradox here where there is an inevitable trajectory toward this, but I do think that we have to be active and we have to actually contribute to this awakening, which we're going to get into how that is done. But first of all, we have to recognize the problem. And this is where I have to get into a little bit of a self-critique and a critique of the anarchist philosophy as it stands. And this is, again, I want to be clear on this. I'm going to have critiques here. This isn't me coming up here to shit on the anarchist philosophy, because most of you are still going to see that I am still an anarchist on the level of values. But I think there's a lot of limitations of the philosophy in terms of being able to see the structural problems that we have as a species in the way that we implement social organization, coordination mechanisms, rule-making schemes, no matter if that's voluntary or whether it's on a computer network. And I may mean like voluntary in a real physical society. There's all kinds of issues here that aren't necessarily addressed by the vast compendium of anarchist literature. And I know this because being an anarchist for 10 years, my thinking has always been, well, the solution to the problem is just to abolish government and we're good. And if that were true, I don't think we would all be here at the People's Reset, right? I think we can all agree that we need to be active in the world. We need to try to create things. We need to engage in entrepreneurship, the creative endeavors, we need to enact different types of social movements and grassroots movements to precipitate and catalyze the change that we want to see, guys. So let's talk about the problem and some of the stuff that I had to go out and learn about by reading literature outside the anarchist lexicon. And this is not just like quote unquote leftist literature. This is also material that people are talking about who work in the ecological fields. And by the way, there's a lot of people here who have a concern that are here at the People's Reset that have a concern with where we're headed in terms of our planetary environment and the idea that we potentially are on the brink of catastrophe. So let's talk about this real quick. As you guys know, the very first thing, which is 100% still true and doesn't change, is that the nation state and these legacy institutions and legacy structures are 300-year-old political and social technology that not only don't work, but I think a lot of us here would agree that they were absolutely designed to be an apparatus of control, to be a surveillance panopticon. And if they weren't explicitly designed for that, I think there's a good case that it is. Just watch Derek's documentary series, The Pyramid of Power, or read any of his work, or a number of you guys here. That's easy to make the case. But even if it's not, these systems still, because of the way that they're designed structurally, the way that we organize ourselves on a fundamental level has a tendency to warp on the level of incentives. So this is the area that I want to discuss that is not talked about enough. So right now, as a species, we're not only facing institutional failure, right? A lot of these problems that I'm going to mention are 100% catalyzed by aspects of institutional failure, but that's not it. So we're facing what people like Daniel Schmachtenberger and others have referred to as a meta-crisis or a polycrisis, right? So if you haven't familiarized yourself with that term before, this does not just mean that we're enduring a simultaneity of crisis scenarios, right? That's part of it. We're facing potential ecological collapse, planetary boundary issues, and what I mean by that is we've reached a juncture in the lifespan of the human species, which we refer to as the Anthropocene, where we have the facility and the capacity to completely self-extinct, right, ourselves through our use of weapons, etc., through largely technological means. We're also facing what John Vervaeke has referred to as, he's a psychologist, by the way, as a meaning crisis, or a great crisis of meaning. And this, I really think, speaks to what John was talking about on his talk just now. And let's give him another round of applause. I can't hear you guys giving an applause, but for having that kind of extreme and very crucial vulnerability that he had on the stage. But to me, a lot of what he was dealing with is representative of what Vervaeke was talking about, this idea that there's a large meaning crisis or crisis of meaning that inundates all of our society on just epic proportions. And what I mean by meaning crisis is that people are the rates of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, psychoticism. I think Carrie also spoke to this in her talk, by the way. They are all on the rise. This is what sociologist Emil Durkheim has referred to as social anomie. People are more suicidal than ever, and the mental health epidemic has reached staggering proportions. And in Vervaeke's work, this is representative of a meaning crisis. More and more people feel like they're losing connection. They don't have community anymore. They don't have people they can reach out to for help very easily. So they get stuck in these addictive mindsets where they're just focused on, hyper focused on something that is self-destructive. They let the algorithms online hijack their neural circuitry. They get so invested in doom scrolling and being involved in clickbait and getting rage baited, right, to use the vernacular that we use to describe these black-pilled internet cultures, that it completely destroys us from the inside out. This is part of the polycrisis, right? So we're talking about ecological collapse, catastrophe. We're talking about institutional crises. We're talking about meaning crisis, which is largely psychological. We're also talking about, of course, the threats from artificial superintelligence, from the biosciences, specifically in synthetic biology and the engineering of novel organisms. So this is part of the weirdness factor. That's what I call it, or this weirdness maximization that Terence McKenna has talked about in all of his work, right? This notion that things are going to get so weird and so out of control that people are finally going to have to sit down and say, what the fuck is happening? We have to talk about this right now. So here's the thing, like the weakest link of anarchist literature, largely speaking, is that the main focus is, of course, on the problems, right? And the problem there is it's just like government did it. That is a good chunk of it, or that we need markets to solve it without like thinking about what that looks like per se. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with this from a moral perspective, right? This is actually what we want. And even these philosophies that we're talking about, agorism, etc., are still very much market-based, and they certainly should be. But we have to understand that there are things that we have to do on the market. We have to take an active hand to contribute to the changes that we want to see in the world. And this is just absolutely so important. So let me get back into this too. I want to talk a little bit about why I mentioned structurally, and this is really important to discuss. Structurally, we're dealing with problems that are often left unaddressed, not just by anarchists, but a lot of different segments of the population. And the reason that our institutions fail, like they have a tendency to fail, the reasons that our organizations tend to suffer is because the incentive mechanisms become extremely perverse. So what I'm talking about now is not just normal market dynamics. Markets can certainly path in a direction of having a perverse incentives or becoming perverted, the incentives over time. But what this really is, what we're really talking about is game theory, right? So these perverse incentives that emerge in society, they create in game theory what is referred to as a Moloch trap, a Molochian dynamic, or a multipolar trap. Let me explain those terms, because this is exactly what all of our institutions are embedded in, whether they're governments or whether they're companies on a market. Even if they're small startups, they likely don't have these problems, but they often will grow to have these issues. So a multipolar trap or a Molochian trap is a game theoretic scenario where an individual person, right, or even a small group of people are optimizing for their own well-being at the expense of everyone else, right? Let me give you some examples. Think about the obvious example that we know about, the politician, okay? So the politician is constantly and perpetually trying to optimize for his own well-being, which means trying to rise in the ranks of the political elite, trying to gain more power, trying to gain more authority, also trying to take care of his family or whoever's in his close proximity or orbit, What this means is that all of us suffer as a result of this. And we see this, of course. This is the nature of the state. This is the nature of the government and governing apparatuses. They go down this route. And this is thinking, even if they weren't designed like this explicitly, they're naturally going to go down the route of becoming corrupted because the incentives on a fundamental level are totally and woefully broken. Let me also explain real quick what I mean when I call this a Molochian dynamic. And this is something that has been written about by Daniel Schmachtenberger, by people like Scott Alexander. Moloch, first of all, is the Canaanite deity of child sacrifices. Another way to describe it is the Canaanite deity of costly sacrifices. So as the mythos of this deity goes, as Moloch goes, a tribal people, the Canaanites, early civilization, would be sacrificing their children at the altar of Moloch. And they would do this with the idea that they're going to have a better hunt, right? Or they're going to win the next war with the neighboring tribe, or they're going to have a better foraging season or a better growth season, right? But you see that what the costly sacrifice is. Not only is it just heinously, not only is there a heinous moral question underlying sacrificing your children, but there's also the idea that you're destroying your society in the process of making it better. So optimizing for metric X at the expense of metric Y, right, on the long term, means that you are self-annihilating as a culture. So when I first read about game theory contextualized with social psychology, I got the greatest insights, guys, that I've ever had with regards to why things break down. It's not just that we have government, right? Because these problems also exist on the market and in the market environment. So what ends up happening is a company, it grows large enough. We can even imagine this outside the scope of the state without all the legal protections that companies get. Companies naturally tend to spiral out of control, right? And because everyone's trying to optimize for their own benefit. And this means that they're going to do whatever they can to get outside of having to deal with natural market consequences that all the Austrian school economists have talked about. And the biggest tragic repercussion of this is that it's very likely that they're going to be able to get away with poisoning the downstream well, that they're going to be able to have some type of toxin or some type of environmental pollutant get released as a result of this. It's also possible that they can hurt people in the process simply because of the structural dynamics of how the folks have organized. And don't worry, I'm going to offer a solution for all this, and it's not too unorthodox from ultimately the anarchist perspective is still boiled in to this whole idea. We just have to broaden our thought process a little bit into how to solve these problems. And what it really is, and I'm going to get into this actually very soon, but I have a slide that's after this one where we're going to discuss this a bit more. So I want to put on the brakes just a little bit, right? But this is the problem we're dealing with. It's not just that we have institutions that have authority, right? And that we want to end that authority. It's that we have to unlock and unleash new ways to approach this problem that involve more plurality, which also involves more acceptance of different ways that we can organize. And then we need to be able to put checks on the way that we organize, not with government, of course, but with different kind of mediating factors in technology, which we're going to get into. Okay. And the whole purpose of this, as you're going to see, has very directly to do with awakening planetary intelligence. We really need and require planetary intelligence to understand how this is going to iron itself out, and also to solve a lot of these problems. Okay, let's talk about this component of planetary intelligence now that we've unpacked the issue quite a bit. All right, let me see. Change the slide. Okay. All right, so I've been hosting a series of X Spaces on this. This is a constant ongoing lecture that I have, and perpetual talks that I'm doing on a regular basis. And my solution, and I'm writing a book for this as well. It's in the process. I'm publishing on Substack on Counter Governance Live. It is the idea is called the parallel mind, right? The parallel mind is just my personal version and the community's version of the Earth consciousness, or what it looks like to have an Earth wake up, right? And the reason that we need this, the reason that we need to have the Earth really wake up and have this parallel mind, is because it's going to give us the tools that we need to solve the poly crisis and to solve the meta crisis. So just a couple of things to help get this grounded more intellectually. So Chardon, in his book, he mentions that evolution has become conscious of itself. So I mentioned prior that we're evolving as a species, and we have evolved. And by the way, and I want to try not to get too off track here, because there's a lot that goes into this, and I don't have probably the time or the template to do this. But what's happening is that evolution, when I say it, I'm not just talking about biological evolution. I'm not talking about Darwinian speciation through the process of mutations or adaptations, etc. I'm talking more about what a process philosopher would talk about when they talk about evolution. Evolution from the quote unquote Big Bang, right? From matter being extremely heated in an instant to being cooled over billions of successive years. And then that matter, as it cools, starting to create new forms, right? This is novelty, or this is what we can refer to as complexity theory. Over time, matter becomes more complex, and then you get new forms, right? You get everything from our current planetary state, right? You get the Anthropocene, you get human beings out of that, right? You get consciousness, you get language, you get all the world wars, you get all the beauty that has come out of art, you get all the poetry, you get the William Butler Yeats of the world, but you also get, of course, you get the Taylor Swifts, you get all the jazz, right? All the hard rock cafes, everything that has come out of the crucible of the original Big Bang is a process of ever ascending complexity, right? And this is what Chardon's book is about. And what, of course, that was the consequence of that is this omega point where we actually create or craft God. So I think I talked about this last year. I talked about a vision that I had while I was tripping on MDMA at one point in time at one of the Anarchapulco conferences. And I had this vision of things being built up in successive layers and new creations, new technological forms, new social forms emerging from that. So that initial insight, or that bit of wisdom, I've expanded it recently. And what I'm thinking about now, and I hope you guys can help me think about with me, is that I don't believe that where we're headed is inevitable. You know, McKenna had a thought process that through his like Time Wave Zero project, that where we were headed with the creation of God, or the collision with this quote unquote hyper object at the end of time, was something that was mostly inevitable. I don't think that it's inevitable, and if it is, it's kind of an illusion. I think that we have to be active, and we have to create and develop this. And right now, I believe that we have the tools, the wisdom, the collective wisdom, the acumen, the social intelligence to actively build this, and for it to be a species-wide project. You see, this is why I have started to question the nature of even needing like an ideology that we can attach ourselves to, especially if that ideology gets so set in its ways. And this is to reference what Carrie was saying, where we end up just mirroring all the aggressive aspects of those societies. Instead, what we can do is we can all work together and come together in like a unification to develop out this planetary project. This is what Benjamin Bratton and his team are working on as well. He calls this planetary computation. But in my model, what it is we're trying to create a parallel mind. And so the term, there's two parts to this. A parallel mind, first and foremost, it takes the term parallel as in like a parallel project, a parallel institution, or a parallel economy. We're creating these parallel institutions that operate outside the scope of these traditional systems. It's all about the exit and build ethos that Derek and others have talked about earlier. So that's part of it, but the meaning is twofold. It also is a reference to parallelized processing architectures like MMP. This is like massive multi-parallel processing that we use in our computational networks. So what I'm doing here is I'm borrowing the architectonic imagination of computer networks, and I'm thinking about how we can apply this on a planetary geographical scale in order to create new emergent properties, right? It's almost like hijacking teleology. It's like hijacking the directionality of evolution, right? Even Ray Kurzweil, the well-known thinker and futurist who wrote the book The Singularity is Near, said that all technology is evolution by another means, right? So in my mind, I think parallel institutions, parallel economies, this is like the cryptocurrency networks, the DAOs, the DeFi networks, the regenerative financial ecosystems, but it's also the physical networks, the Agorism cells, the freedom cells, logo circles, the quote unquote network states. All of these communities are creating new parallel nodes all around the geographical circumference of the earth, right? You can think about this if we think about an analogy, just the human brain. These are like clusters of neurons that communicate with each other, that hook up and link up. And the result of this, of course, at least in the brain, is the emergence or the purported emergence of consciousness, whether it's an epiphenomenon or some other factor is a conversation for another day. But what I believe that we can do is that we can actually develop these parallel nodes, right, that are going to give us the capacity to not only awaken the earth, right? That's like a byproduct of this through emergence, right? And what that looks like is still up for speculation and debate. But in a very real way, what this sensorium, this global sensorium is going to allow us to do is to tackle our most vexing problems. So Timothy Morton, who's like an ecological philosopher, he said that he used the term hyperobjects as well, except he describes some of these pressing problems that we're dealing with in the poly crisis as hyperobjects, which means that they extend beyond the realm of human consciousness, like beyond the realm of us to individually be able to parse what's happening. An example of this is like think about oceanic microplastics, right? There's a lot of dead zones in the ocean. There's microplastics that are filling up these dead zones and that are contributing to different kinds of environmental factors and effects. And the reason that we understand this is because of planetary computation already, because of the ocean has now a vast sensorium in it, right? We have sensors everywhere in the oceans that pick up what is happening with these microplastics in the ocean and its effects on the salinity, on the heat index, and all these different metrics in the ocean, right? This is a part of what we're creating with the parallel mind, you see, and building these individualized nodes, right, through parallel ecosystems and institutions allows us to break down each individual problem into, like in parallel architecture, a subroutine, right, or a subsystem. And in traditional computing architecture and parallelized processing, this allows you to get greater efficiency gains, but it also allows you to scale and it allows you to solve specific task-oriented problems way more efficiently, right? And so you see here, guys, why this relates back to the social psychology and game theoretic dynamics. I'm of the mindset that having these pockets, these communities, allows us to alter our governance mechanisms to solve specific kinds of problems that we're dealing with on the earth. And listen, this is not, let me bring the metaphor and the abstraction way down so I can like really help make this concrete. Think about Prospera. Okay, so Prospera in Honduras is a parallel society. A lot of people here might have been there. There are some people who have criticisms of it, but that's a conversation we can have later. You're happy to message me about. We can talk about that. This is just one example of many. But Prospera has been there the longest. But one of the key features that you'll notice about Prospera is they're focusing on one single issue, and that's human longevity. They have a goal. It's biotech, right? So imagine other communities that crop up that are communicating around the world that are focused, very, very hyper-focused on this. They don't have a lot of governance blockades. They have a very well-organized coordination protocol or mechanism. Maybe they're using smart contracts. Maybe they have just a really great constitutional framework. Maybe they just have full anarcho-capitalism. Maybe they have whatever works for them individually in that space. By the way, I'm just checking on time here. It looks like I still have plenty of time. Good, because we have a lot to talk about. So I think this is one subroutine or subsystem that's part of this parallelized mind architecture. And more of these communities can crop up focusing on the same problem, and we can mimic computational architecture. You see, there's something that Benjamin Bratton said that was a really beautiful phrase that really woke me up to the simplicity and the beauty of everything that's happening on our planet. He said that hairless fire ape get rock to think, right? So if you think about it, this is what's happening. We are just an ape-like species that invented fire, right? The Promethean point in our history's evolution. And then we figured out something crazy. We figured out how to get rocks to think, right? This is like the golem in Jewish mysticism, where we taken and we folded silicon in certain ways, and we were able to invent circuitry and semiconductors in order to bring technology to life. That's fucking magic, my friends, that we were able to do that. Some people may even refer to it as demoniac, and there are some risks that we can get into. I'm going to talk about transhumanism here in a bit, because I know there's a lot of critiques about transhumanism. I have those as well. We're going to talk about it. Don't worry. I'm not forgetting that. But the point that I want to make here is this isn't just about technology. It's also about social architecture. It's about governance, restructuring. It's about inventing new forms or allowing new forms to emerge in our communities. And I'm going to get into that on the next one. But you see, I hope I've really helped elucidate this idea that we can create a thinking Earth that allows us to solve Timothy Morton's hyperobject, right? It's because of this planetary computation that Benjamin Bratton and his team are working at. And this is really a beautiful direction that I think we're headed as a species. And it could culminate in Teilhard's idea of the omega point, where we do construct some type of divinity. Maybe there's a spiritual component. There's been a lot of different terminology used for this. Terence McKenna called it the strange attractor at the end of time. Ray Kurzweil combined it with artificial intelligence and referred to it as the singularity. There's books right now about the end of times that are being written en masse. So this is a very, I think, apropos topic with regard to where we're at. But I look at it very optimistically and solutions-based, where we can actually create the nodes of this network to solve our most vexing problems, which is not just human governance, right? Which is the problem with violent territorial government nation states and those legacy systems, but also the problems that we have with markets potentially having perverse incentives, also ecological and domain collapse, also threats from artificial superintelligence. All these problems that seem extremely intractable, right, are actually going to be able to be addressed by the way that we're developing planetary computational networks and frameworks, right? Okay, so let's get a little bit more into like the sociological and the philosophical side. I'm going to move on to that slide. I spent a lot of time on that slide, but it was probably 100% necessary. Okay, so we started right at 3:30. Good. Okay, I'm going to expand my screen. Okay, so here's like I mentioned before that I don't necessarily call myself an anarchist, but still it doesn't really matter, because a lot of what we're working on is ultimately anarchist, right? We're exiting and we're leaving. But there is a term philosophically to describe these communities that are going to be part of the parallel mind. And this is a philosophy that's typically referred to as panarchy or cosmopolitanism. It's just the understanding that we're all radically different. We all have different perspectives and viewpoints. Yes, a lot of us are processed through the meat grinders of education, and we're heavily propagandized, and we don't have any kind of way to like really approach understanding our true selves. We get stuck in all this machinery of the current system that I've talked about before, and that others have pontificated at length and ad infinitum at this event. But here's the thing, guys. In order to actually move forward in this world and create change, we have to understand that there is a plurality of folks who want to have different kind of experiences and need different ways of living. This is like one of the main differences I have with anarchism. Some people would disagree with me on this context, but here's like typically the idea is to abolish government and boom, we're going to have a better world. Like the abolition of government is sort of built into that concept. But I think a lot of us who are even anarchists understand that if it's voluntary, if people want to opt into their own servitude, why shouldn't they be allowed to do that? And frankly, there are some people who want to have their lives micromanaged from cradle to grave, right? Fine, right? If you want to be part of that community, it makes you happier, whatever, you can do that. If there's people who want to experience or experiment with anarcho-communism and an anarchist enclave, like an anarcho-communist syndicalist co-op setup, fine, do that. If there are people who want to experiment with anarcho-capitalism, fine, go ahead and do that. Have a completely free. So here's the thing. The world that we're moving into is not, this is key, is not ideological and should not be ideologically confined I think one of the biggest perpetrators of human anguish and this human complex to engage endlessly in bickering over how we should organize our societies and the way things should be and all the fucking politicking is the result of being ideologically boxed in or feeling ideologically caged, right? So this is exactly why, regardless of all the nation states in the world, that we have started to create these parallel networks, these agorist networks, et cetera, whatever you want to call them, that have different kinds of experiential models built into them. So this is like Prospera is one model, right? And they're probably more on the libertarian side. But then you have people like Balaji creating the network state, right? That has probably more technocratic leanings, right? I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to say there's people who want that, need that, fine. But we certainly 100%, and this is key also, and this is probably more of the straight up anarchist bent, or at least agorist, is that we have to champion the philosophy and the concepts of exit, right? If we don't have the capacity to exit our communities and networks, then we're absolutely 100% screwed, because the only way we can experiment with governance models in ways where people don't get hurt is to allow people to leave those communities, right? And I think John also touched on this in his talk. Exit is key. It's fundamental. In some ways, it's not even like anarchism, anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism, panarchism. What we're really dealing with here is the exit philosophy, or some have referred to it as exit ideology. This is in my opinion, the philosophical perspective par excellence of the 21st century. If you are a defender and supporter of the concept of exit, you are moving adequately into the future, because you're not saying that I defend any one particular ideology. What you're saying is people should have the ability to experiment with and opt into whatever societies and communities they want to, whether they're more controlling on that spectrum or whether they're less controlling. That's all. That's what this means. Some of you will still call that anarchism. That's fine. But what this really is just a cosmopolitan break from business as usual. Okay. It is where we're moving, my friends. And I'm going to get into how this plays back into the parallel mind, right? Because we can't build the sensorium that we want to see to create this planetary mind to solve these most vexing problems unless we open up our governance to experimentation. I think this is happening, right? We have things like I mentioned, Prospera. You have the network school. You have Logos, right? And the Logos circles. You have the Freedom Cell network. You have John's community, the community that he's working with. You have Praxis. So we are in a groundswell of cultural change. We are amidst, my friends, one of the zaniest epochs in human history in terms of how we're transitioning our governance apparatus. And it's a really beautiful time to be alive and to be able to witness this and see it unfolding. This really is what Chardon has talked about in his book. And by the way, there was another gentleman who wrote about this and who echoed Chardon's sentiments, and he was actually writing about it in the 80s. His name is Peter Russell. And Peter Russell wrote a book called The Global Brain, where he essentially sensed what was occurring. So I meant probably to talk about this a little bit later, but I want to talk about it right now. So a lot of you, whether we have a semantic disagreement or otherwise, that's something to discuss later, and I don't mind. But I think what a lot of people are thinking of, well, man, this looks like this could be like transhumanism, and transhumanism is evil. It aligns us with the pedophile demon worshippers that fill in the upper echelons of power and the halls of Washington and DC in the United States. And well, friends, that could be one of the realities that we ultimately live in if we don't. That's why I'm so big about how can we direct these energies into ways that are more productive and that don't speak to the Peter Thiels of the world, that don't speak to the oligarchic elite, and that speak to those of us who simply want to be able to exit and build, that want to exit and live in these other communities. And so I think that transhumanism, from the perspective of the ruling elite, is certainly something that we want to steer away from. But I think optional transhumanism, in terms of us being able to explore different modalities of being, even in these specific communities, there's nothing wrong with that. So I just want to say that transhumanism in that context is a more nuanced discussion. Like a lot of folks who critique transhumanism aren't familiar with the full broad scope of the philosophy. So there's an individual by the name of Max Moore who invented a philosophy that is really an outgrowth of the transhumanist movement. It's called extropianism. You guys are familiar with our friend Roger Ver. He calls himself an extropian. Extropianism is just an evolving framework for how we can better augment ourselves as human beings, moving into a more technologically advanced future. But it also very much strongly is, or it very strongly defends the idea of that we should be able to protect ourselves, be able to opt into whatever kind of transformations on a human level that we want to engage in, and we should have a right to not do that. And it's specifically focused on individual liberties with an understanding that we can't stop. We can't be Luddites. We're already moving into this high-tech future, but it is incumbent upon us as builders, creators, developers, visionaries, iconoclasts to create the kind of change that we absolutely want to see. And I think the way that we want to see it is evolving this planetary architecture so that we can save ourselves from utter annihilation. And that doesn't mean we have to merge with machines, but it certainly does mean that we have to be involved with the planet as it evolves into these next phases. You see, this is the big paradox that we're dealing with. In some degree, we have no control over this. And then to a large degree, we have a lot of control over it. And that's the paradox that we're going to be wrestling with as we transition into this next phase of reality and of life. Cool. Let's see. Okay, time. I think I have enough time to get through the rest of this. I have until 4. Okay. All right. So here I'm going to kind of, in this phase here, I want to recap a lot of what I discussed, and also get a little bit more detailed into what the parallel mind architecture is inclusive of. I didn't mention this earlier, and maybe I could have organized my slides a little bit differently, but I wanted to get the risks and also wanted to get some of the critiques out of the way. Again, guys, those are as much self-critiques as they are just critiques of the philosophy and ideas, but also an understanding simply that there's a lot of overlap in what us as agorists are working toward, okay? Involved in the parallel mind structure, the way that I've written about it and the way that I've spoken about it, is that there's really 3 components of this. It's the parallel economies, the governance structures, and the culture. So it really takes all of these components to form these Earth-based geographical neural clusters. And it takes that experimentation ethos to develop these. One of the reasons why this is important, it's not directly listed here, is that I think as people who are involved in being future-oriented and thinking about where we're headed, we also have to understand that now we're at a time of collective wisdom and understanding, that we should not only have to pull out a crystal ball and maybe see where the future is going and then guess at it. Instead, we can pull out the crystal ball and we can make it a reality, right? We can actively assess what's going to happen and then grasp at it. So there's a book that probably would be very difficult for a lot of us here to read because it's very left-leaning, but there's a lot of good points in it. It's called Nordic Ideology by a European writer. I think his name's Franz. I forget the last name, and I butcher the German. I believe it's German anyway. But in the book, like the very second chapter, he talks about the power of attractors, right? So you guys are familiar with an attractor in chaos theory and chaos mathematics. What an attractor is something that an unstable and seemingly chaotic system moves toward. It's something that becomes manifest as a semblance of order in a very chaotic domain, right? So in a mathematical structure, if something seems complex, it can be made manifest and comprehensible and parsable by the attractor. So what's happening as we innovate in technology and socially is that we're actually spying out attractors ahead of time, right? As an example, at one point in time, Bitcoin was a social and technological attractor, right? We saw this on the horizon. A few very capable people and visionaries saw that Bitcoin could be a thing. And what they did was they grasped that attractor. They took that attractor into their bosom and they said, we're going to make this a part of our future reality, right? This is notwithstanding all the consequential events that happen as a result of Bitcoin, all the ramifications, all of its problems of we won't get into any of that right now, but I'm just speaking to this one example. And this is an example in any kind of technology that became made manifest in reality, it's because at one point in time it was an attractor that peeked its head out, that reared its head up, and that some people acknowledged and said, we're going to take advantage of this. So this is really what these nodes in the planetary mind are about. It is about creating the necessary and the sufficient conditions to give rise to emergent properties. It's like hijacking complexity theory or novelty theory and saying, we not only do we understand this abstractly, mathematically, conceptually, philosophically, logically, but we understand it to such a strong, palpable degree that we can actually work it. We can mold it as if it's clay, right? We can make it manifest. We can create out of it what we want and make it our future. This is like, uh, being Gandalf or something in Lord of the Rings and having, I hate to use the term Palantir, right? Because we hate Palantir, but just using the reference of the crystal ball, but being able to see what's going to happen and then change that future or make it manifest. And that is important. So it's the crystal ball. It's being able to scry the future. And by the way, this is what's been embedded in like ancient pagan traditions and occultism since time immemorial, right? The whole idea behind like Wiccan philosophy is to leverage some kind of magic to alter or bend nature in a fundamental way by leveraging the power of crystals, right? Hence technologies to shift the direction and the orientation of the future. And that's exactly what we're capable of doing. In a lot of ways, these ancient traditions, right? This stems back. This goes not only beyond like Greek culture as Pythagorean thought, Pythagorean mysticism, Gnosticism, etc. A lot of these occult traditions had manners of understanding that we can contribute to molding our own future and changing the reality as it is. This is what we're doing now, and this is what we're finally learning and have figured out through the lens of technological advancement. Okay, so as I mentioned, the other thing that's important about this, I'll reference here the bullet point, is that these isolated nodes, potentially, and this is another risk vector, are potentially vulnerable to attack. They're also vulnerable to those communities limiting exit and therefore becoming like the North Korea of quote unquote network states or quote unquote parallel societies, whatever term you want to use, and then causing a malfunction or a dysfunction in the neural network of the planet. So in order to like solve for this, we 100% have to maintain as many of these exit node operators and exit clusters around the world as possible. And we also have to develop the technological and institutional infrastructure that helps produce understandings, risk analysis, and sentiment for these different communities to ingest. And that way people can very quickly understand what is not working. And just like on a market environment, you end up boycotting or you end up shifting the trajectory of which node's functioning, right? Think about in the brain, if you're on I'm going to argue by analogy here. If you're on like an antipsychotic or some kind of psychiatric medication, which are largely awful for you, and which the brain interprets as a toxin, over time, your brain learns to route around the psychopharmacology of that particular compound. This is what Robert Whitaker has in his books and his work describes as tardive dysphoria. It's basically you create the same kind of situation you were trying to solve. Like if you were a psychotic or a depressive, you're creating these same situations over the long term because your brain chemistry routed around and augmented for the psychiatric compound. So this is what we have to do on a planetary scale. We have to understand that there's a sickness of some kind, right? Like a neural breakdown in the circuitry because it's not following along this pattern that we created that optimizes for emergence, that optimizes for like governance experimentation. And now we route around that in a way. We discontinue that quote unquote drug. We don't experience the tardive dysphoria, but we discontinue that bad approach, and then we create the new kind of circumstance that we need to be in. And I think this is a good part of understanding how we can course correct moving into this new world that we're actually creating. And it's, again, this bears mentioning. This is how we create and continue to augment distributed sensing and make these hyper objects of the polycrisis completely intelligible. Let me see my time here. Okay, cool. So I got 10 minutes. I think I'm actually moving to the end of the rope and we're about right on time. Okay, so this is the last slide before the end, I believe. Yeah. Okay, I want to make it clear that this is a solution-focused talk. I got very heady and very broad. We got really broad. We talked about changes on a planetary scale, where we're headed. Now I want to talk about exactly how you guys can get involved and how we can actually create this kind of change, and the learnings that I'm seeing from being on the ground in these different kinds of communities. So this is what has been referred to as the planetary stack, or there's similar terms for this, just the stack. This is from Benjamin Bratton's work, and you can just Google him. He has a whole institute. It's really just phenomenal stuff on planetary computation. So part of the planetary stack, as I envision it, is that we have to build. First, we have to build these keep creating these parallel institutions. It can even be humble and small to start with, right? Just an intentional community, an eco village, doesn't matter what it is, and experiment with the different ways of organization, because you understand it can break down, right? You can implode, but that's natural. That's part of experimentation. You start up and you create another one. You can also build parallel institutions online, right? Through DAOs, decentralized finance, whatever you want to be, whatever you want to do, right? You can build it, and these are representative of this ecosystem, especially if you're part of these quote unquote blockchain communities that have their own memetics, or the parallel societies that have their own structures, their own cultures. This is part of it, right, guys? And then you connect, right? You link through these open protocols and this great sensory apparatus that's being continuously grown across the globe. And then that's how you continue to communicate. And then you can also gatekeep some of that communication, right? For relevancy, if you have to, through creating like the diodes on the planet of the communication within the planetary stack, right? So and this is how you sense. You're perceiving planetary data together, right? We're augmenting the sensorium that we already have, but we're also now focusing on very specific problems. Think about artificial intelligence advancement. We know that governments aren't going to solve that problem. They're in runaway race dynamics, Molochian dynamics. I don't have any faith in pure market dynamics to solve that. So what we need is a planetary stack. We need this plural governance experimentation where there's these subroutines being run, where there are people specifically focused on artificial intelligence risk, and they're putting out their material, their inventions, and their innovations to solve those problems, right? And now, lastly, we want to be able to respond. This means we want to coordinate our actions at scale. This is if we have subroutines, if we share values, and we also share, like we all do, we share values, we all share sentiment about the current direct trajectory of our species or one particular problem, then we get together and we solve that problem through developing these governance protocols, governance stacks, planetary stacks, communication networks, physical communities, the whole 9 yards. And all it really boils down to, my friends, is this is part of the cluster of the planetary mind. And you see, this is also part of what is the attractor for me, the idea that parallel societies, parallel communities, their cultures and their infrastructures and their economics are the attractors that we have to bring to the surface in order to create this awakening. You know, people like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, his work, and also people like Henry Bergson, who wrote Creative Evolution. A lot of these guys, they either thought that, well, in Bergson's case, he thought the universe was just novel. It wasn't going anywhere specific. And of course, Teilhard thought that there was an automatic injuncture. What the reality is that we can act on this, and we can actively build this like it's a blueprint, right, for where we're headed. And man, I guess I want this to come from a place of as much humility as possible. I definitely don't want to give you guys the notion that I just solely came up with this alone and I'm like a chief architect or a leader of this. I built this whole thing as an open source community. And again, there are many people working on this. It's not some flash in the pan idea. I mentioned Teilhard, obviously, and some of these older thinkers, but Benjamin Bratton's work in his institute that's happening right now. Also, Alexander Bard wrote a book called Process and Event. They created a whole philosophy around this earth god that's being manifest called syntheism. This is actually a huge movement now that's happening in a lot of different domains, because we're understanding that all of our hyperconnectivity and superconnectivity, and to use Marshall McLuhan's term, this global village that we're developing is becoming more and more aware. And with its awareness, it's going to have capabilities that we don't have even within our networks, and we especially don't have as individual selves in our individual lifetimes. So this is a very humble ask of you to keep building in this direction, and to also understand that this isn't transhumanism, and this also moves well beyond the pale of some like ideology, be it communism, anarchy, whatever it is. That doesn't matter. What matters is that we're working together to build this and to become unified around this blueprint. And and I think we're going to continue to see more and more people come up and talk about this idea. Teilhard de Chardin was a great visionary. What he saw with the noosphere and planetary emergence and complexification theory is absolutely astounding. If there's one thing that I would ask you to read or to check out, it's his work. It's a bit of a trod to get through, but it's definitely worth looking into. All right, so now I think I'm just about right on time. So here's the stakes, guys. We're in a transition, as I mentioned. We're being midwived. Almost, it feels like it's against our will, but it's really not. But we are being midwived either into annihilation, species extinction, or a great transition in the way that we organize, in the way that we coordinate, in the way that we look at our problems, the way that we optimize around different kinds of solutions. And everyone who's here at this event, at the People's Reset, whether you knew it or not before this talk, you are wholeheartedly involved in this particular trajectory, in this movement for awakening the planet and finally fulfilling what I believe in a lot of ways is our destiny as a species. I think that this choice is really grandly poetic, really mythopoetic, and deeply archetypal, to use Jungian terms. We are getting to be the midwives, part of the conscious midwifery of creating a planet that is aware and that's conscious, that can solve problems. And I personally believe this is a artifact or a construct that is going to very much be alive in ways that we can't fully understand. And this isn't mysticism per se. A lot of you guys here are mystics, and that's fine to view it like this. But this is just the technological and the sociological and the biological reality of all this congruent evolution that we're experiencing over great densities of time that has just become highly congealed into this final, beautiful, ecstatic moment at the end of time. So, and this is why I think that Teilhard's quote is perfect to end this talk on. It's someday, he said, someday after mastering the winds and the waves, the tides and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love, right? That's what I believe this is about. It's about unifying our species toward enacting this blueprint. It's harnessing the energies of love. And then for a second time in the history of world, man will have discovered fire. And I think that's one of the most beautiful quotations from a writer and from a thinker that I have ever read. So I want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen to me. I've had the opportunity over the past few years to do a lot of ruminating on my personal philosophy, where I'm at personally, where my thinking is, and also, of course, to do a lot of futurism, to think about where we're going and how to enact that. I think my talk this year is a lot more well organized. I have my thought together a lot better in terms of the directionality than I did last year. But last year, when I gave the talk, it was really similar to this, but this is like the congealed version and the full understanding from that year of thought of where we're headed. So again, thank you very much for listening to me. Again, there's probably a lot of points of contention and even disagreement, and I wholeheartedly am open to receiving those. And you can reach out to me on Telegram, of course, and we can discuss it. The very last thing I'm going to mention here is Derek gave a really nice shout out to Logos. The event here was sponsored by Logos. I'm able to give this talk to you guys today because of Logos, who is working in the parallel society space. And, I mentioned that governance being a 380-year-old architecture. Where a lot of those ideas actually stem from is the recent book that Peter Ludlow and Jared Hope wrote called Farewell to Westphalia that Derek mentioned. You can download it he gave you the book link, but if you just go to logos.co, you can download it there. hit the hamburger at the top and it just says book. Download their book for free, open source, or you can support them and go to Amazon and actually buy a physical book if you want. So also, it bears mentioning again, we're having an unconference event in Lisbon. It is going to be at the beginning of March. You can actually join here. There is a fee to get in, but we kept the fees as nominal as possible and as affordable as possible, because any extra additional funds that we have, any profit is going to be put back into the local community in Lisbon, into people working on privacy tools there, or trying to develop some kind of grassroots or localist movement. So we very much want to see you there, and feel free to come talk about it. So thank you guys. I think I'm out of time now. I got that signal a couple minutes over. Appreciate it very much. Cheers.
All right, People's Reset, how we doing today? We still awake? Yeah, that's right. Lots of power on stage today. I think we learned a lot about markets and economics and many powerful businesses that are changing the face of humanity. And that's what this is all about. You may know above our company, we were birthed out of this event. So when we get together, we meet each other and we exchange. That is the essence of life. And with this event, we could not do this event without our sponsors. Can we get them up on screen, please? So there have been many amazing sponsors this year, and I'm really happy to be presenting them. Of course, we've got Nanoscale. We wouldn't be able to do this streaming that goes out to 100,000 people over the course of the week without them. They are the solution for private cloud hosting. Check them out. You can see this on the bottom of our website. Go ahead and click on these logos. You can go to the page. Of course, we've got the Freedom Cell Network. We've got Derek's The Conscious Resistance. What's the name of that one? The small one. Meditate More podcast. The Weston A. Price Foundation. Zano Cryptocurrency, which we'll have a talk tomorrow. Above Phone, of course. And Regenerative Culture, Yoshi and Paulos. The Daylight Computer Company, Conscious Spaces, Live Free Academy, Logos, and We Are Not Zombies. So please, guys, give it up for all these sponsors. They make this event possible. Man, it feels good to be back on stage. I love you guys. I miss you guys. I'll be speaking tomorrow at the end of the day. And I can't wait to share what I have with you. But today, we are going to hear from Miriam, who's going to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Hakeem. Let me just clarify. You're going to hear from Miriam and Pugsley. So today, I have the honor of introducing a man that you guys know as an investigative journalist, as a documentary filmmaker, as the organizer of the People's Reset, as a writer, as an activist, and as a community organizer. And I have the absolute honor and pleasure of knowing him as the most loving partner, as the most caring uncle, as the most loving dad, right? Yeah. As the most incredible son to his mother, and as the most incredible brother to my sister and his siblings, and so much more. And it is such a blessing to get to know him this deeply and to be this close to him. And I know that through him sharing his story and everything that he's going to share with you, that you guys are going to get to know him a little bit more today. And I'm so excited for you. Please help me welcome Derek Bros.
All right, it's my turn. Now I get to share some stuff. I'm probably going to be the third deeply personal story here. Mine does relate to parallel systems, though, I promise. I feel like this year there's a theme with certain speakers under all the themes. Like, there's a lot of shit to release. There's a lot of stuff that needs to come out over the last year. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about. For those who don't know, I just released a new book last month. It's my memoir. It's called A Man of My Word: How I Overcame Addiction, Depression, and Mental and Physical Prisons. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to amanofmyword.com. And everything I'm going to be speaking is going to be coming from this book or related to this book. My talk is about how to build a parallel path for addiction, a parallel path to the AA, 12-step, and generally like the mainstream way that people tend to deal with addiction. And I'm going to explain why I think this is relevant. You know, some of you might be thinking, how does this relate to building freedom, creating stronger communities? But as I'm going to share, I believe that if we don't deal with those other traumas, which are the root of the reasons people use drugs or get sucked into porn or gambling or alcohol or any other sort of thing that can become habitual and then what we would call an addiction, that there is always a root cause, a root trauma, something that needs to be healed or worked on or at least addressed and then learned to love underneath that addiction. And I speak, of course, from experience. And this is largely why I started a website and started doing the work that I do and calling it the conscious resistance, because I've always believed that the building of a more free world, it's not just about how many gardens we can build and how many seeds we can save and how many guns you can have and how much, you know, end of days supplies you can have. Sure, that's valuable. Do those things, have that sort of security and comfort. But there's also, and it's not even just about going to confront the government or the corporations or to, you know, focus only on the physical realm. There's always that internal realm, the spiritual realm, psychological, mental, however you want to think about that. And so to me, the conscious resistance has always been the bringing together of these two worlds. Until we address what I call the internal tyrant, our doubts, fears, insecurities, and limiting beliefs, it ultimately doesn't matter what we do in the physical realm, and vice versa. If we only do the internal work and only focus on the healing, like some in the spiritual crowd where they're just floating above all of us, just in perfect bliss. And anytime you try to bring up something about, did you see what ICE is doing? Have you heard about what's happening in Gaza? They say, no bad vibes here, only good vibes here. Or they say, well, it's all 5D chess because the Galactic Federation's coming to save us and there's really nothing I need to do about it. So I'll see you at yoga. There's that too. There's all these ways that people sort of aren't dealing with it, whether it's, again, focused only on the physical realm and ignoring the internal world or vice versa. But it's, to me, the conscious resistance is the bringing together of those two things. So that's always been a focus of my work. And again, it comes from my own personal experience. And if you've heard me speak, you may have heard some version of me sharing about my story, my general story of getting addicted to drugs at 20 years old, going to prison, discovering, you know, meditation and prayer, doing a lot of internal healing, and then getting into journalism. And that's the story that is in this book. This book doesn't talk about any of my activism or journalism. It ends at the beginning of that. This is like the prequel to everything that you guys mostly know me for. But today I'd like to share the full story, if I could, with you guys. And we're going to get to the reason I share this story is because I want you to understand that I can speak from direct experience once I propose certain solutions to you that I think are necessary. Because again, back to my point of what does this mean? What does this relate to freedom? Every time I've shared this story for the last 12 years that I've been doing public speaking, whether that was in Houston, Texas, where I'm originally from, or in the US, or in the UK, or anywhere, every time I share my story, even briefly, about having been addicted to drugs and dealing with depression and self-harm, somebody will come up to me, often a mother, but also sometimes a son or a daughter or a father, and say, my son's addicted to drugs right now, or I lost my daughter to addiction, or my father's in a rehab, or I used to be addicted, or I've never touched drugs in my life, but this is the way that I'm struggling. This is the addiction that I have, or the thing that I have. And so even in our conscious, freedom, spiritual, enlightened spaces, there's still a lot of trauma here, right? I mean, I think we all probably run into it occasionally in our own movements, like, wow, I thought we were all heading in a different direction and these people are still doing these same traits. Well, it's because even though we might have those intentions and that knowledge and that feeling and understanding that we want to build a better world, if we don't do that internal work, there's still things that are going to come up, right? And it's not that we're ever going to be perfect, but ultimately these things, until they're dealt with, they will continue to show themselves. So for me, if we, as the people who are aware, one, there's a problem in the world, things are not functioning as we believe they could, and two, we want to do something about it, right? Because you guys came here for solutions, right? Not just to hear about how bad the world is, but to try to see what can we do for those coming 7 generations, right? What can we do for the young ones that are here, the ones that are out there playing in the field, joyful, blissfully unaware to the things that all of us know about the current world, right? And you know, shout out to all the parents, because that terrifies me. I'm like, damn, can I really do it? There's like digital IDs about to happen. What will I tell them? Son, just 10 years ago, there was freedom. I'm sorry you came into this world and it's not there anymore. It's like, that's a scary thought to me. So shout out to those who are brave enough to do that at this moment. That's what it's really about, though, is those coming generations. So if we're the ones that understand there's a problem, we understand that we want to do something about it, then part of that, I believe, should be an effort to heal and empower ourselves and heal our wounds and our traumas as much as humanly possible. Because by doing that, as well as building decentralized tech stacks and permaculture gardens and all these other things that we highlight here at this event, we will be participating in the building of the better world. Does that make sense? I remember I did a podcast back in 2013. It was called For the Good of Everyone, Focus on Yourself. And that's kind of the message, right? I mean, really, if we put more energy into that, I think we'd all be better off. So that's why I want to share my story with you, and just in its raw, gritty nature and all of it. And why I think we need alternatives to those systems. Because if there are people within our freedom communities who are addicted and it's secret and it's kind of quiet, because, you know, I've been to some conscious events and they might have like an AA or sober circle for people who want to come to things like this, but then are intimidated when the meetup's at the bar or when everybody's smoking weed or whatever. And those people feel like, oh, I can't come to that because I have this potential addiction or because I might relapse or whatever, right? That still exists even if we're not talking about it here, whether it's drugs or other things. And so I just want to kind of create space for that. If anybody else is struggling that or has struggled in that way, like by a show of hands, who knows somebody who has been addicted to drugs or alcohol? Everybody in this room, right? It's a lot more prominent than maybe we want to talk about. And I can speak from experience that is a stigma that when I share my story of like, yeah, I was addicted to crystal meth. I lived in a crack and meth house for about 2 or 3 months until I hit rock bottom and I decided to change my life. And I smoked weed to stop smoking meth. And then I got sober. I see the look in people's faces like I should be, like they're embarrassed for me. Or like, oh, crystal meth? And like I'm like, I'm okay. Are you all right? Because I'm fine. Like this was 20 years ago and I'm okay talking about it. Are you going to be okay? But because I can see that there's still a stigma. There's like we have to talk about it quietly. Like, no, I was addicted to crystal meth. I was hooked on Xanax. I was the drunk puking everywhere at every party. And I was doing those things, not necessarily consciously at the time, but now I can look back and see clear as day that I was definitely self-medicating and I was avoiding a lot of things. So it's more prominent than we realize and we need to talk about it. So I was arrested 20 years ago, November 16th, 2005. Literally just 2 months ago, the 20th anniversary passed of my arrest, which changed my whole life. And again, that's the story that's in this book. The book starts on the day I was arrested. And I was arrested at 20 years old, 2 weeks to 21. And I'd spent the previous 2.5 years bouncing from one substance to the other, from one intense chaotic relationship to the other, and doing a lot of damage to my body, to my mind, both through alcohol and drugs, but also physically through cutting myself and things of that sort. And it was only when I got arrested and I found myself being sentenced to a 2-year felony sentence and probation and to this Texas State institution, essentially a prison that they call a rehab. And I'll talk more about why I think these things are a scam. And it was only when I hit that bottom and when I realized that I had exhausted every option. There was nothing that my mother, my lawyer, my girlfriend, anybody could do at the time. I could sit on the expensive jail phone and cry to them all day long, and there was nothing that anybody could do to get me out of those 4 walls until they decided they were going to call my name and let me out of there. And that space of feeling like what is a very disempowering feeling was actually where I started to find my power, if that makes sense. When I finally felt like, okay, there's nothing I can do. Like I can't hide. You go to these places and there's sort of like a cliche that you can become a better criminal when you get locked up. It's very true because I'm in there for selling and using drugs, right? But I'm meeting identity thieves. I'm meeting people who are carjackers and who break into houses. And if you want to get a better criminal, you're like, okay, let's meet up when we get out. Let's team up. But like that's definitely happening. And unfortunately, that was sort of what I did, not getting further into other crimes, but just getting back into drug dealing after I got out. And in that space, though, when I found myself just like, I'm here. I have to figure out why I'm here. I really started journaling. That's probably what saved my life, is I started journaling every day. And I had been only a couple weeks sober off crystal meth at this time. And so obviously the more time I'm behind bars, I'm getting more back to normal after 2.5 years of just constant drug use. And I don't mean like I did a line of coke once at the club. I mean, like doing coke and meth together and taking 10 hits of acid and drinking 30 shots of tequila till I'm puking everywhere and do it, all those fun stories are in there. And so, I mean, like a very intense, chaotic, not like we're having a good time, even though I guess I thought I was at some points. And so as I'm coming off of that and I'm behind bars and I have no other choice but to face the facts that this is where I'm at. I'm looking at the calendar. It's you know, late November, and the earliest I'm going home is next September. And just having to face that. And the hardest part was that I'd grown up in a family with drugs and alcohol prominently everywhere. I'd grown up visiting my father in prison. My earliest memories as a child are being 5 years old and visiting him in prison and wondering why we're going to this building with giant razor wire, and why they're saying that my mom has to go back to the car to change her shirt because it's too revealing, or why we only get to see my father for 2 hours, or why he has a black eye, or all these kind of things, and why we have to leave. And so many of these things that you know, it's not anybody's fault or anything. I don't think my mom had the tools that were probably necessary to kind of help me navigate that, me and my brother and sister. And for me, as a kid, I kind of internalized a lot of that. I started to just think maybe there was something wrong with me. You know, it's a kind of, in a way, I think, a story that isn't new to many of us, that children are traumatized at a young age from such a confusing, hurtful experience. My father coming in and out of my life, making promises to be there for birthdays, for Christmas, things like that, writing letters and sending Christmas cards, and then showing up one time out of the blue, taking us to the park. It's being the time of our life. And then the week later, my mom's like, he's back in prison. I'm sorry, guys. He's not going to be around. And then a couple of years later, showing up, and that whole game. And so that led to me being a very depressed little kid at a young age. And I mean, by 7 years old, I was suicidal. I mean, at 8 years old, starting to like play with knives in a way of like, I don't know, trying to see how much pain I could take, or I really can't even explain what I was doing. I just remember these things and experiencing that. But it was also a time of just being extremely sad. And then I remember 7 years old. It's interesting that in my life, a lot of my major events have happened in chapters of 7. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else, but this memory that I'm going to share now, and as I said, I got arrested about a week and a half before I turned 21. I was 7 years old, and I remember this is such a clear memory. I remember being in the driveway, in the garage, the door's open, and the door to the house is over here, and my mom keeps coming in and out. I'm 7 years old in a little blue and white baseball uniform, just, you know, watching the street. And my mom keeps coming in and saying, we have to go, we have to go. And then, you know, I'm just like, just a couple more minutes. And eventually we have to go. And obviously I was waiting for my father. He was out this time. He was supposed to be showing up for some baseball game. He'd got out of prison. He never showed. And I remember clear as day how that felt. Then this sadness continued essentially till I turned 14 years old. And another strong memory that I recall, being at my grandmother's for Christmas. Every year, the Bros family gets together for Christmas Eve, and my father had just been released the latest time from prison. And him and his father, my grandfather, were ready to actually try to reconcile things. They had their own history of messed up things since before I was born. In fact, it was my grandfather who got my father into drugs at 14 years old, you know, at a very young age. So they had their own trauma and their own things. My grandpa moved on with his life, became a successful business person, but his son never did. He just kept going in and out of prison. So they had all this stuff, and it was going to be a big Christmas. He's going to be there at Grandpa's house. Everybody's going to be there. And I remember walking in, I'm 14. It felt like the entire world depended on this moment, because I think I was really starting to crack as a young kid, and I was already starting to get into trouble. And, you know, I was the wannabe, almost could have been school shooter, no lie. I got suspended from school for a hit list in 7th grade. I got suspended and arrested for saying I was going to burn the school down in 8th grade. Like, I was headed in a bad direction because of all this stuff I was dealing with. And I remember being 14, we walk there, show up at grandma's, the door opens up and my father's not there. Immediately that felt like something was wrong. And I could just sense in the air that things were just not right. And I'm looking around, okay, I don't see him anywhere. Heart's starting to beat, feeling a little bit of anxiety in my chest. Is he here? Is he here? I decided to walk to the bathroom, and I hear my grandma telling my mom that he's already been arrested. He's already on the way back. And I remember going to that bathroom, slamming the door behind me, and just crying my eyes out for several minutes. And then in that moment, like, I said, fuck this. I'm never going to let anybody hurt me again. And I put this shell around me like I'd never felt before. What I thought was strength, which was really just me masking all this pain with anger. And that's the point that I started to get further arrested into schools, getting fights. You know, I was in all advanced classes. I graduated high school early, a semester early than all my friends, went into college, but I was known as the crazy kid. I was the one throwing chairs at teachers, getting arrested, getting fights. I was lashing out, trying to deal with all this stuff. And also I kind of developed into the class clown. I was, in my own world, but I noticed that when I acted silly or crazy, those cool kids seemed to like me and want to hang out with me, right? And so I started to become just like a crash dummy for other people. I really had no sense of self yet because I didn't like whatever I felt. It felt like, again, maybe it was my fault my father was there. Then it was like, fuck him, I don't need anybody, I don't need anything. I used to love the word misanthropic, like the hatred of humanity, like hating people. Like that was a feeling that I identified with for a long time, or at least I believed I did. And then as I said, I graduated early. I got into drugs pretty much immediately, started drinking all the time. First time I ever got drunk, thanks to my brother. I took 21 shots of tequila. I ended up rolling around the floor naked everywhere. They videotaped the whole thing, and then they'd pop the VHS tape into the player every time people came over and be like, hey, look what Derek did last time we got drunk. That was the first time I ever got drunk. But that was an example of how I did things. If you want me to do something, all right, well, I'm doing 20 beer bongs, not just one. What do you mean? Acid? Sure, give me 10. Let's do some lines. Let's do even bigger ones. Like that's just where my life went for 2 years. And eventually, after going from alcohol to Xanax to taking ecstasy all the time till I was a zombie, and then, one thing after the other, I eventually tried crystal in January 2005, and then within 10 months, I was locked up. Within 5 months, I was on the street. Within 2 months, I lost my job, lost my apartment, and the relationship I was in at the time. And there's so much more to this, but this is just an example of what my bottom looked like. And yeah, and then eventually I did get myself sober. I was able to actually, when I was living in this crack meth house, it was an attempt to try to change my life. And one of the guys I was friends with at the time, I said, I'm really tired of this. I don't think I'm happy. Like, let's get a place, let's get a job, let's really figure this out. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. He said he was committed to the same thing. He tells me he finds an apartment we can both move into. I'm like, awesome. This is going to be a fresh start. This is late summer 2005. I'm like, finally, 2 crazy years. Like, I'm going to get my shit together. And then, he takes me to see the apartment. And oh, by the way, he mentions we got 3 months, six months free rent because it turns out the managers are crackheads. So I got them some crack and they gave us 6 months free rent. I'm like, okay, that's a kind of weird start. But all right, I guess a new place is a new place. Turns out the whole apartment complex is infested with crack. And as soon as we moved in, just as you can imagine, turned into I'm like Harry Potter sleeping in the room under the stairs, tripping, listening to Pink Floyd all the time, like, oh my God, this is not where I'm supposed to be. And eventually I found the strength to just say, like, at least these people respected me enough to not offer me anything when I said, like, I'm really trying to get out of this. Please don't offer me anything because I will say yes. And again, I do credit cannabis for helping me. I remember sitting in the corner of this crazy house, just smoking cannabis out of a bong for day 1. Okay, I didn't do meth or do anything. Cool. Day 2, day 3. By day 8, day 9, I was able to just get up and leave. I mean, my car had been outside the whole time, but I didn't have the strength to leave, and I had burned so many bridges that I had nowhere to go. But eventually I got through that. I left, went back to my parents' house, and my mom's house, and I did try to get myself right, but I was still struggling after starting to get sober, struggling to get a job because I couldn't take a drug test from smoking weed. And I decided to do what I'd learned to do over the last 2 years, which was sell drugs. And I went and did one more deal, and that one more deal is what got me arrested on November 16th, 2005, which I believe 100% everything happens for a reason, so I don't regret a moment of it because it's what put me here with you guys right now. Okay. So, as I said, I get locked up, and we're going to get to the solution in just a moment, but I want to share a little bit of how I got into what you guys know me as. So after getting locked up, and as I said, I start to sort of reflect and see this path that I just described of like, wow, I've been dealing with some intense trauma the way through there. And as I said earlier, with kind of toying with suicidal ideation as a young kid, I started cutting myself. This tattoo covers up the biggest scar that I had on my body, where I hacked myself 3 times. I blacked out and I don't remember doing it, but it involved 20 stitches, and it was very bad. And I talk about that in there. And there were things like that I was doing. And I just, like I said, I didn't have the tools to process all this stuff. And also for some reason, I just couldn't quite get it that maybe sticking all these drugs up my nose was making things more confusing. I just felt like I'm in such an emotional mess. Oh, okay. Now how can I figure this out? It wasn't working out very well. And yeah, eventually after getting locked up, I had that space. I don't want anybody to come away thinking that I'm crediting the prison system with helping me in any kind of way, because these places are horrible institutions, and I'm speaking of the United States specifically, which is the largest, prison population in the world. And these places are not about rehabilitation. They're not about actually trying to help people come back into society a better person, which is all, it's the kind of bullshit that people tell themselves about the prison system. That's the Disney version of events we were sold. Well, bad people do things, we send them to jail or prison, they're going to be rehabilitated and they come back into society. And we all know that that's bullshit, because for one, there's no sort of care or anything to try to help people on an individual level. It's just like, okay, you got caught with drugs, go in there with the guy who tried to kill somebody. You got caught with, stealing into someone's car, go in there with the guy who has a completely different problem. And there's no effort to actually try to do treatment. So I don't want anybody to think that my story is a credit to the prison system in any way. I met so many brilliant minds, and many of them are still wasting away in there. Could be doing much better out here in the world, and it's for garbage reasons. I'm not talking about people who are violent and truly have some of their own issues to work through, but people who got caught up into drugs or caught up into some other circumstances, and because the system's rigged against them in a lot of ways, they find themselves in prison. And then once you're in that system, trying to get out is a whole nother thing, because the other aspect, besides the way the system's built, so many of us, and I would hate to think anybody in this room, but definitely the majority of the population, let's say, still has a stigma around felons and ex-cons and people like that. And we have a very big forgiveness problem. And and like, we want people to be rehabilitated, go into prison, do your time, come back out and be a better person. But I don't want to be around you. I'm going to judge you, and this is something I dealt with, and thankfully I don't have to really deal with it because of the life that I've created for myself. But the vast majority of felons can't get job many places, can't get rented many places. And back in Houston, where I'm originally from, I mean, we were having to go to shittier and shittier neighborhoods for me to find somewhere that would be willing to rent to me as a felon with a non-violent charge from 20 years ago. So it's very much a factor, and it's another thing that people have to overcome. So there's all these different things wrong with that system, and I'm going to get more into that and why I don't think that system's the answer. But when I was in that space, despite it being part of the prison system, I did use that time to start journaling, to start doing my own internal healing, to start meditating, to start praying, and really open myself up in a way that I never had before. Because before that, I had always been, and I still am, anti-religious, but not just anti-religious, I was anti-God. I was anti anything that was beyond the five senses, because to me, it just felt like there's no way my life could have been as crazy as it was, and somebody is just watching me, suffer. It was just a concept I had a really hard time with, and so I didn't have any openness to that. But then once I found myself locked up and in that feeling of powerlessness, of knowing I wasn't going anywhere until they called my name, I was like, I got to do something. I have to figure this out. I've been mad my whole life at this guy, my father, for being in and out of prison, and here I am getting arrested for the same thing, for drug charges. How the hell did I get here? I knew enough to know that wasn't the road I was going to go on. So I really started doing my spiritual work and my healing journey, and I'll tell you guys more about that in a moment. But I did get out eventually, and as I said, I got out on parole, and I dealt with all that system. I also dealt with racism and violence, and most of it's just fear in all these institutions. It all comes back to fear because of people being put into a dehumanizing situation. But through all of that, I just tried to focus and know that I needed to get some healing. I remember there was nights when I was starting to meditate, thanks to my grandmother, my grandmother was one of my hugest spiritual influences in my life, and she passed away just a couple of years ago. And she was sending me books on what's called centering prayer, which is kind of like a Christian meditation by Father Thomas Keating, and Zen Buddhism. And it was my first real introductions into these things. And so Granny's sending me these things in jail, in prison, and I'm just starting to like, all right, I guess tonight I'm going to do this cross-legged thing they're describing in this book. I don't have a YouTube video to watch or some local Zen master. I'm just trying to figure this out. And I could hear people like, what the fuck is that guy doing over there? You see what he's doing? And I'm just like, just stay in the zone. This is just for me, forget these people. And I learned in that space is filled with fear and doubt and anger and all these things. And I think that was what was so vital for me, is that it was such a dark place to be, but that was the only thing that was keeping me sane, that and journaling and working on these things. And so eventually I do get out after bouncing in and out a couple times. I did a year, got out, lasted 5 months before I went back. And I did that whole game till I was finally released October 2008, got off parole June 2009, started watching conspiracy documentaries in late 2009, and the rest is history. And I've been here since then. But it started with that journey. I don't know if I hadn't gone through that low and hitting rock bottom, if I wouldn't have woken up and started to care not only about myself, because that's really what I was lacking. I had no sense of self-worth. I had no sense of self-love. And because of that, the idea that I should care about the world and whatever's going on with the government or the environment or any of these issues, it was just like, what do you mean? I'm just trying to live through the day. Like, and that's when it kind of dawned on me that if we have people, as I started to wake up, I was realizing how important that is. If we have people in this planet who are suffering from their own traumas and their own different things that they're not dealing with, it's going to be, I believe, much harder for them to even give time and energy to these other causes that we're saying, hey, pay attention to this thing. I'm worried about this thing happening. Well, if somebody can't even imagine waking up the next day, you know, if they're barely making it through there, it's kind of hard to put extra energy into carrying outside the world. Sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can kind of ignore yourself and put that energy outwards, but eventually those things will surface. And so as I was having this wake up journey, I realized, okay, that's got to be a part of the puzzle. And so for the last 16 years, as I've been doing journalism and documentaries and interviews and all the stuff that many of you have seen my work for, I've talked about these things. I sprinkle into my message, but this book and really this event and this year is the first that I'm really trying to make addiction and healing the root causes of trauma a more focal point of my work. I won't stop doing journalism and documentaries and things like that, but I think this is just as important of a cause, because again, I think if our brothers and sisters are out there suffering from their own addictions and their own traumas, then how are they going to be able to join us here and hear the language that we're speaking, inviting them to these kind of events where they could get the healing that they really needed? Who was here last night and got that healing, felt that healing on the dance stage? Thanks to Miss Natalie Rise back there. That's the kind of healing we need for everybody. But if they're not even able to, again, find that self, because each of you, whether you recognize it or not, we've all got our own doubts, fears, and insecurities. And I'm sure you, like me, still occasionally might struggle with a sense of self-worth sometimes, or maybe just not feel good in your body or things like that. There's all sorts of things we deal with, but you value yourself enough to at least have made the effort to be here right now. You realize that you deserve this healing. You deserve this experience, this activation, right? We need all our brothers and sisters at home and around the world to recognize that and feel that same thing. So I want to focus in the coming years more and more on how we can help those people who are dealing with those things. As I said earlier, every time I share this story, somebody will come up to me and tell me their horror story of their loved one that is currently, you know, addicted to this thing or this thing. And I lost several good friends to drug addiction. I want to tell you one last story before I propose to you what I think are some potential parallel alternative paths to the AA 12-step addiction is a disease model, which personally I don't find helpful. No offense to anybody who does. I do have friends who found a lot of value in AA and 12-step. I did not, and I'll share about that in a moment. But when I first got locked up, I decided to write my father a letter and basically tell him who I was as an adult. You know, after that 14-year-old experience, I hadn't seen him at all, you know, and then here I am 7 years later thinking I'm an adult at, 21, and I'm like, I'm locked up. So I decided to write him a letter. The other thing that was a real kick in the nuts is the week that I got arrested, he was getting out of prison. It was just like, I literally thought about it at the time as like, I'm continuing the family tradition, because there is intergenerational trauma in my family. And I definitely believe it's related to, like, on my mom's side of the family, the Sanchez family, they were indigenous to Texas, and some of them came from Mexico 3 generations back. On the bro side of the family, we're Czech, and there's also some native. And both sides of the family have drugs and alcohol abuse, have people going to prison, have suicide, like at least the 3 generations back that I know of, So there's something intergenerational there, and we all experience this in different ways. But it really felt like I was continuing this tradition that had been laid before me, and I saw this, of course, as an opportunity to break that. I decided to write my father a letter and just tell him, like, look, you don't know me. I don't really know you. This is who I am. This is what I've been up to. I was just super real with him about, yeah, I've been doing these drugs. I've been doing this. I was partying. I kind of went all crazy. And I don't remember exactly how I ended it, but I definitely got across the sentiment that, like, this is your fault, which on one hand is true. And I sent that letter to him, and he eventually got a letter back to me that was not at all what I was hoping, or I guess wanting at the time. And it essentially was, you need to take personal responsibility for your own actions. You're a grown man, which was also true. It didn't feel good to hear that. And it wasn't like the apology or anything that he could have said that, and my bad, but he just kind of said, is like, figure your own shit out, dude. And yeah, so I was kind of like, yeah, okay, fuck this dude. I don't need to talk to him. And I continued on my healing way, and I didn't want anything to do with him. I started getting into activism 2009, 2010. We're making the local news. We're doing big protests. Like, it was a high energy time. 2013, he gets released from prison. and he asked to be released to Houston, where I'm from. He's from Austin. He never lived in Houston, but he specifically asked to be released from prison in a halfway house in Houston because he said he wanted to be closer, or at least attempt to be closer to myself, my brother, and my sister. My brother and sister were just having their first kids and had no interest in, him coming in and out of their children's lives and creating trauma for them too. So they weren't open to it. I decided, as I was beginning my activist journey, and also, as I said, I'd started my spiritual journey in prison. And when I got out, I continued meditating. I tried ayahuasca one time. I continued all the healing. I was doing the activist stuff, doing the healing work. And for me, it was like, I need to see this dude. I need this for myself, So he told me where he was at, rode my bike across downtown Houston, went and met him up at this halfway house. We sat outside, talked for like an hour. And I was telling him, like, look, you don't know me, but this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. I'm starting to get into activism. I'm doing all these things. And this guy was extremely institutionalized. His name was Troy, by the way. He was very institutionalized after spending 30 to 40 years of his life in and out of prison institutions since he was like a teenager. You could see it, and he didn't know how to deal with the fast pace of the world. And so he would just get locked up like that. So he didn't understand the internet. He barely understood computers. That just wasn't part of his paradigm. But I'm like, yeah, I'm posting things on Facebook and people are paying attention and things are happening. And he's like, cool. It seemed, you could tell I was excited though, right? And he was like, it seems like you're doing something you care about. But most importantly, I took this opportunity to tell him, I forgive you. I want you to know that I forgive you. Everything happened for a reason. And at this time, he was in his late 40s, early 50s. And I was saying to him, I know that you want something else for your life, man. You can let go of whatever anger or pain you're holding on to from me. You need to talk to my brother and sister, but I'm telling you, I forgive you. I've let go of it. Everything turned out, the way it's supposed to be. I'm at the beginning of some fucking cool adventure, and it has been a pretty cool adventure. And I just got to say that to him though, this is, and it wasn't even about him really. It was like, I needed this, I needed to let go of that. This is of course a lesson in how forgiveness can be very healing, not only for the other person if it's received, but for yourself. I needed to tell him I forgive him, even if he never showed up again, even if he continued in and out of drugs, whatever it was, it really didn't matter. So I had that opportunity and I was grateful to do that. Because unfortunately in June 2018, he ended up dying of a drug overdose. He stayed out of prison that time from 2013 to 2018, and he just progressively started doing some of the same things. And the last time I saw him was April 2018, and he was staying at my granny's house. He went back to Austin, and my granny, like any mother, had given everything she could possibly do throughout my dad's life to try to help him. Vehicles, money, clothes, whatever. She was just constantly, she just couldn't give up on her son. And so he was staying there. And I remember going in to see her, and her and I had a very close relationship. And as soon as I saw her, she's like, I can't take it. I caught him trying to steal the TV last night again. He disappeared. He lost his phone. He came back with some crazy story. He's using again. I know it. It's the same thing as always. And I was just like, Granny, I'm so sorry you're having to deal with this. I don't have a solution. And I remember leaving, and my father sitting outside her house on the driveway, just sitting on a chair, smoking a cigarette or something. And again, I kind of had this conversation with him, and it was this really weird but powerful role reversal where I kind of parented him for a moment, which is very different. And I was just like, you're 50s, you're in your early 50s. You could still have a long life. This could just be some long, dark, fucked up chapter, and you could figure shit out. He was an electrician. I was like, you can get yourself an electrician job, find somebody that you care about. I know you don't want to live with your mom forever. You could get your life together and still live 30 more years. And this could just be some crazy shit you went through, and you still have this whole other beautiful chapter. And this was the only time in my life he didn't try to promise me anything. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes and said, I'm proud of you. And I, we hugged, and that was it. That was the last time I saw him. And a couple months later, June 2018, Miriam and I and Myra, we were on tour going around the US. I think we were in Michigan, and then I get a call from my sister, and we're at some camp out festival. I'm like, what's going on, Jessica? She's like, he's dead. He's finally dead. We all kind of knew that something like this might happen one day, and eventually, I get to go see his body, and I said my amends. But I'm telling you, if I did not say that I forgive you, I would have felt so much worse at the time of his death. Of course it hurt. I still had hope that maybe he was going to figure something out. Not because I needed a father in my life anymore. I've grown up. I figured out my own way. But the hope that he could be whatever it was that he wanted out of life, you know? I don't know. I don't know what his favorite movie was, what his favorite color was, or if he ever aspired to do anything. I really don't know. And I don't know if he did. But I had hope for that. And unfortunately, it didn't come to pass. But his story and my going through my own story is largely why I said that I want addiction and talking about these things to become not only more normalized within our community, freedom communities, health community, conscious community, whatever, but also that I want to do something about this. I have an idea and I don't have the full plan, resources, or really the time. So I'd love anybody who feels passionate about this to reach out to me, but to start something, not a nonprofit within their system, but maybe a private member association or something like that. It would be called the Troy Bros Foundation. And it would help people who are dealing and struggling with drugs. Sorry, guys. I want to be able to help other people who have these same struggles and understand that there is another way around. I didn't write this book to boost my ego. I wrote this book as a prayer and a hope that maybe sharing my darkest depth could help somebody else, your family members, your friends, somebody else listening, prevent them from going in that direction and from being another number like my father or my good friend Alex or my other good friend Alex or my other good friend Tim. And to know that there is something on the other side. And I don't, have the perfect model or system for every person, but I think I have some ideas. And even one of those ideas is I'm trying to get together some funding. I want to ship this book, print 1,000 copies and get into every local prison, rehab center, wherever we can, to people who might gain value of it. If you know somebody in that situation, I'll send you a free one. I just want, if anything that I went through can be of, a use in that way and not just another story, because in a way, as crazy as it sounds, writing this book on the 20th anniversary of my arrest is also a way for me to close that chapter. I'm more than just a felon, than a former drug addict, I want to work on these issues, but I don't want that to always be my story. I want to help other people who are going through that. And it will always be a part of me, of course, and it's nothing I'm ashamed of, but I've been telling this story now for so long that I'm ready to make it a new story, the story of how that my story is helping other people, whether through this Troy Bros Foundation. And again, the reason that I think we need parallels is because for me, teaching people that you are diseased and you are always going to be that way is incredibly destructive. And again, that's my personal thoughts. It's okay if other people disagree. I have addict friends who disagree and say, look, I really truly feel like this is just who I am. I'm not going to judge or tell other people what to do. In my experience, I have seen and experienced how that can be a crutch, how it can be an excuse that people can use instead of addressing the deeper root causes of what might be causing them to act out or use drugs or drown when they're drinking, all that sort of stuff. There is something underneath it. I believe it. I've seen it. And I know that until we address that, we won't be able to heal humanity and then create that better world that we're after. So we got to get to the root causes. And I don't think telling somebody that you are diseased for the rest of your life is really the kind of mindset that we want to promote, at least not for me. And a big part of my work, as you guys know, is exit and build. Let's exit from systems and build better ones. Well, I want to exit from unhealthy mindsets and limiting beliefs. And to me, that's what is when you tell somebody you have a disease and you will have that disease for the rest of your life. Now, again, that doesn't mean there's not variations, because I'll be honest with you, I'm not sober. Like I smoke weed every now and then. I have a drink, here and there, but it's not a problem. It's been 20 years. I've been able to manage my things. And part of that is you see the same passion I put into my work. As much drugs as I used to do, now I just take that energy and I just bury it into all this stuff and do cool stuff with it. Like that's literally, I've had to learn how to navigate this. There was underlying reasons I was using drugs, but also I think maybe some of it could be personality, that I like to just go crazy, go extreme into things. So now I'm just an extreme anti-government person. It just works out. So I don't think that that's a helpful model. Another thing I will say is this term recovery, and maybe I'm being nitpicky here, but I do believe in conscious language. And that is a thing in terms of the words you say and the way you program yourself, right? We're all programming ourselves. They're trying to program us. You might as well be the one in control and program yourself with good, positive, empowering thoughts. And so to me, that idea that you're in recovery, what is recovery? It's something that happens after an accident, right? After you've been wounded. Oh, I'm recovering. And so if you just say for the rest of your life, I'm in recovery, like you're constantly wounded, you're constantly healing from something. And yes, again, there is healing to be done, but it just feels like you're setting yourself up for a trap of like just giving yourself a way out, a crutch, an excuse to make. That's at least just where I've found. And because I had to go to AA. I was mandated. I didn't like it, but I was mandated to be there throughout that period of going in and out of prison. I had to go to 2 AA meetings a week, 2 aftercare meetings a week, take random drug tests every day. And when I would go to these AA meetings, and of course there's meetings all around the world, so you may have had different experiences than what I'm about to describe, but this was my experience in numerous places, numerous cities, etc. Little house filled with smoke. Everybody's drinking a shitload of coffee. And we call that cross addiction. Now you're just smoking cigarettes all the time, or you're just chugging coffee down. And again, if it helps you from stopping shoot heroin, then great, but don't act like you got to the root. Don't act like you actually got to the root of what's going on. You've just traded one thing for another. And it's like trading war stories of the crazy messed up things you do. And I'm not saying shouldn't be a space for us to share, because obviously I'm sharing with you guys some of the things I went through. That can be very, very helpful to have a space where you feel like you can let go of some of your darkest things. But it just, for me, in my experience, it felt like commiserating. It just felt like sitting there and just focusing on how horrible you were or are or things are, and not any actual like treatment, as they like to call it. I was allegedly getting treatment when I was behind bars. I had to see a counselor once a month, and the rest of the time it was prison. I mean, but I learned later they get a lot of insurance money for that, for calling these kinds of places rehabs. And it's interesting because my journalistic instinct actually started back when I was in prison. I'll tell you guys this one real quick. I was a trustee, which meant that I had a little bit more, permissions and privileges from everybody. So I got to go sweep the floors in some places that the usual inmates didn't get to go. And one of them was like an administrative building, and I'm there with a couple other guys sweeping up, and there's this bulletin board on there, and it's like upcoming Christmas party, blah, blah, whatever. And I noticed this big thing that says warning. So I'm sweeping and I'm looking, and this freaking thing is warning that the water at this facility has 3 times the level of legally allowed arsenic in the water, and advises all the employees to be drinking bottled water and not to use any of it. This is the water we're drinking, making coffee with, showering in every day. I grabbed that thing, I like snuck it in my pocket, took it back to the cell and to the little dorm area. And every time you mail letters, they would basically open your envelope and check it all out. I was extra sneaky, so I was like, I'm gonna mail this home to my girlfriend. I'm gonna sue the hell out of this place when I get out. And and so I like showed them my envelope, and then whoops, sorry, I dropped it and snuck in the thing. I was like, here you go, sealed. She got it, and I had big plans. Again, this is like way before I ever thought anything about activism journalism. But now looking back, I was like, that was that same instinct of like, somebody's doing some wrong here, and like this needs to get out there. Also, there might have been a hope for getting millions of dollars in the process, but unfortunately, she later lost the letter and nothing ever came of it. Like, so yeah. But my point is, these places are not helpful. I don't think it's using this term recovery, that you're always in recovery, or telling people that addiction is a disease. It wasn't helpful for me. I think it reinforces the current paradigm. And the ideas that I think are better parallels or alternatives, they're not anything revolutionary, I would say, or brand new. I'm sure there exist so-called rehab facilities that try to incorporate these things, but the things that were most helpful for me, really it's 2, because I consider prayer and meditation to be variations of the same thing. You know, the contemplation really is what it comes down to. But some incorporation of prayer and meditation into a healing process, and journaling, as simple as that sounds. Because I'm telling you, my mind already races all the time, but if you've been on a lot of drugs, and especially speed drugs, or really any of them, and your mind is scrambled, one of the best things you can do is try to get your thoughts out. Get them out of this chaos up here, down onto a piece of paper that you can then look at, try to understand, digest better, reflect on. I think if I could start this Troy Bros Foundation, it would be a place eventually, a program that we could help people, help them start to get to the root causes through various exercises, including journaling, including trying to develop a meditation practice for the reflection qualities. And, you know, the interesting thing, I think this could be one piece of it, not something we depend on, and this would be controversial again for some in this space, but psychedelic therapy, I think, can also be very valuable. And that's not to say it's a cure-all or anything like that, and that it doesn't come with its own set of potential, you know, things. But for anybody who's gone down that road in a safe setting with somebody that you can trust and, you know, a therapist. But again, I don't want it to reinforce their system. So just qualified people who know how to be what we used to call a trip sitter. Anybody ever been a trip sitter? Watch somebody freaking out? Yeah. But being able to do that in a therapeutic context, you know, somebody, whether that's mushrooms or MDMA. And the thing is, there's science behind this. There is data back there showing the quality of people being able to have transformative experiences that lead to healing, whether that's through mushrooms, whether that's through MDMA. That's just one idea. The other interesting aspect of that is Bill Wilson, the guy who, one of the co-founders of AA, he was actually a huge believer in psychedelic therapy as well as a way to help people heal from addictions. And it was pretty controversial where a lot of the people in the original AA sort of community or forming sort of disowned him for it because they were like, you know, stop telling people to take acid. We're trying to tell them not to do anything. But he found value in that too. So it's just another interesting tidbit. I think in some cases, if people think it's, you know, it's valuable, that could be incorporated into there. And then also, I will say, I don't think all of the 12 steps are horrible or bad or anything like that. It is good to make amends with people when you have the opportunity, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's overall, my issue is with that, teaching people that addiction is a disease. That's something that you're always going to be inflicted with for the rest of your life, because I was told that many times. I saw other people make excuses for themselves with that when they would make a mistake or they would relapse or whatever. It was just because, well, I have a disease. And again, I can't speak for everybody, but that sure feels like you're reinforcing something into your mind that isn't very helpful. So my goal and my hope is that we learn to create new forms of dealing with whether it's addiction or other mental health issues. I'm not saying the freedom movement, the anarchist community, the conscious community needs to turn into a therapy home or anything, because not all of us have the time, the resources, or the patience for that. But I would like this to make a bigger focus of my work, my activism, my journalism going forward. And I want to work with you guys on that. Anybody out there who does have interest in that, please do feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, I'd like to call this the Troy Bros Foundation. And my hope is that by naming after my father, what really came to mind is that I don't want his memory to just be that of another drug addict who didn't make it. You know, like I said, I don't really know him. And I've started to learn more since, you know, through family. I've gotten some old pictures of him I've never seen recently, and learning more and more because I didn't have that opportunity, you know, when he was here. And I want there to be more for his memory than just that. And I would like that memory to be that of somebody who did have his struggles and who did have his trauma and unfortunately didn't make it to stay here with us on this planet, but that his name and his experience and his story and the way that it impacted me can then be used to help other people. That's what I'm proposing. I don't want my experience or his experience or the other intergenerational trauma that has existed in my family and other families out there to go on. I know we're not going to solve the problem and that there will be other drug addicts and there will be other people who die of overdoses. And, you know, there's a whole another element to this that we don't need to get into today, but that's, of course, governments shipping and trafficking drugs themselves, right? I've thought about that later. That's actually one of the reasons I woke up, actually, just real briefly. When I got out and I was a felon, I was going to the library all the time, applying for jobs, trying to get a job and find an apartment. And I decided to read this book as I got sober and my mind was getting cleared up. I read this book called Cannabis, A History. Really great book. It's not drug propaganda either way. Like not, yeah, cannabis is the best thing ever and not reefer madness. It was about the legal, sociological, and cultural impact of the cannabis plant. And it was the book that taught me that the first drug laws in America, the Harrison Act of 1914, was actually about driving out the hemp industry and that the oil industry funded the whole thing. And then later learning that a lot of the other drug laws were related to black jazz musicians and Chinese migrant workers and Mexican migrant workers were coming to steal the white women after they were smoking all the reefer. There was propaganda and racism and money interest behind those laws. And when that light bulb went off, I was like, holy shit, I just got out of jail for drugs and you're telling me there's this other side of the perspective. And then of course later learning what I said, that the CIA and other agencies have been caught being involved in drug trafficking. So it kind of gives you this whole other perspective of like, why did West Houston get flooded with crystal meth in 2005? Because I was not the only person using. And I thought about that later. You know, I got my own conspiracies on it. But the point is, there's more to this story, right? There's reasons that people are getting sucked into these things. It's not just that we have trauma, but that it's widely available, that we have a culture that really glorifies drug use in different ways, and movies and pop culture and elsewhere, and alcohol and things like that. So it is a difficult battle that I don't know we will win in our lifetimes, because as long as humanity has those underlying issues, we will look for a way to escape it. We will look to self-medicate it. Many of you don't use drugs. Your drug of choice is the dopamine released by scrolling all day, because your brain is getting the exact same response. You're releasing that dopamine, you're getting that high. That's the same high that some of us drug addicts were chasing. So we have to think about that as well. All the different ways that we allow ourselves to self-medicate, to ignore, to bypass, and not feel. I think John mentioned this earlier about, finally like stopping and feeling whatever you're feeling inside there, and then trying to understand that, and not looking for drugs or sex or alcohol or the internet or Netflix or whatever to distract you from those things. So my hope is that by continuing to be more vocal, putting my story out there now, that we can help other people in and out of the freedom community who are struggling, and slowly, bit by bit, we can heal humanity and build that parallel world of the future. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys. I appreciate you all so much. Come see me at the table. Let's hang out. Let's talk. Thank you, everybody at home, for being here. This has been day 3 of the People's Reset, Agorism, Parallel Networks. We'll see you all tomorrow night. Thank you guys at home. See you tomorrow at 10.
Our power is in our voice. Our power, it's in our thoughts. Our power is in our actions. Our power, it's already innate in who we are. We are the earth. We are the sky. We are the trees. We are our ancestors. We are the future generations. We are all that is. Our power is in our voice. Our power, it's in our thoughts. Our power is in our actions. Our power, it's already innate in who we are. We are the earth. We are the sky. We are the trees. We are our ancestors. We are the future generations. We are all that is.